Hello and welcome to Spyhards podcast. I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur, dropping in on a jetpack.
Oh, you look so good soaring through the sky there, Cam.
I know, the helmet, right? Really completes the ensemble.
I just wish you were wearing other things.
I'm making a statement.
Well, it says something, but let's not unpack that too much. Let's unpack something else. Something that we've been building towards for the last 4 years. We've only had 2 Roundtable episodes so far, and this one has been a long time in the making. Cam, what are we doing this week?
We are talking about the Sean Connery James Bond era. We already tackled Pierce Brosnan. We also talked about the Jason Bourne era with Matt Damon. And now it's time to move on to Connery, who we wrapped up quite a while back, actually, with Never Say Never Again.
And as you all know over the last few years of listening to us, Cam and I, we're professional idiots. But we choose to surround ourselves with people that are much smarter than us.
Right.
And so to take up these 2 seats aside from us on our round table, we have 2 very special guests. Introducing first, he is the creator and curator of the Bond Experience podcast and YouTube page. He might be American, but he definitely keeps that British end up. It is Mr. David Zaritsky. Hello, sir. How are you?
I am doing great. When you said smarter people, it's definitely our next guest, not me. I'm with the wacky band.
Well, you say that, and I am saving perhaps the best till last. Forget Dr. Hall, forget Dr. Kaufman. We have a true professional on this show. She is the writer of BFI film classics From Russia with Love and fashioning James Bond costume, gender, and identity in the world of 007. Film historian extraordinaire, Dr. Llewella Chapman. Hello, how are you?
Hello, and I think you're slightly mistaken because so many people know so much more than I do. So I'm happy to sit back and listen, especially to David, who is amazing. So there you go.
Well, it's clearly a circle of love, and we can't complete this circle without the man of the hour. Ladies and gentlemen, joining us at the round table, it's Sir Sean Connery.
Bond. James Bond.
All right, if this is the first time you've ever heard a Spyhards roundtable, let me tell you how it works. First and foremostly, we're going to talk about the Sean Connery era, how we all got started with Bond, how we got connected to Sean Connery, what he means to the Bond franchise. Then we're going to talk about the best and the worst of his films. There'll be some nuggets of gold in there and some other nuggets too, which we'll get to. And we'll wrap it up with a deep dive into ranking his films. And then at the end of the episode, we'll be joined by the ghosts of Christmas past. Our guests from our Sean Connery episodes will be coming back to give their thoughts. We've got Calvin Dyson, we've got Mark O'Connell, we've got Phil Nobile Jr. joining us at the end of the episode, sharing their thoughts and their love for Sir Sean Connery's James Bond era. But I guess we need to start off with original connections. How did we get connected to Sean Connery? And I can't think of a better person to start the discussion than Dr. Llewella Chapman.
Well, thank you very much. My dad, when I was about 6 years of age, thought it would be a very good idea on a rainy Saturday when we were supposed to be doing supermarket shopping to show my brother and I Dr. No on, this is how old I am, although not so old, on a recorded VHS copy of Dr. No. So he sat us down and said, watch this film. So we watched it and we loved it. And then the next week he was like, well, you love that too much. You can watch Raiders of the Lost Ark and you can watch From Russia with Love. And it was fantastic because both of those films are brilliant. But what my dad didn't tell me, because I was quite young at the time, was that there was plenty of novels and plenty of films to go around. And so when I watched From Russia with Love for the very first time, I did not know that Connery would survive the fight with Red Grant, aka Robert Shaw. And so I was sitting on the edge of my seat. And that was amazing. And I've never, ever got that Bond moment back again. You know, that moment where you think, oh, he's in trouble, you know. So, yeah, so that was my very first introduction into Bond. And so I feel actually quite lucky about that because I was so I suppose, innocent, that I didn't know what was going to happen. And that really truly is, to me, the magic of the Bond films, you know.
It's interesting that your first was actually Dr. No. I feel like a lot of people who are coming to Connery a little bit later tend to start with something like Goldfinger or Thunderball versus like a Dr. No.
Yeah, I mean, the one Bond film I never saw till I was about 21, so when I was at university, was On Her Majesty's Secret Service. My dad did
Right.
not allow us to watch
Mhm.
that film, even on television. He refused. He basically said, "This is rubbish. You're not allowed to watch it." So it wasn't until then that I was allowed my own autonomy over which Bond films I watched that I watched it, because he refused to allow that, because he just didn't like laser.
What a great way to start that journey and have that built-in fear that you don't know what's coming next. You're seeing it as people were meant to see it in the theater in the 60s. You don't know there's a Goldfinger. I mean, there were books, but who knows if Sean Connery's coming back for a third film? He could die. That's a really cool way of watching it.
It is. I agree. I mean, my husband James Chapman would tell you that a lot of them went down the shops in Britain anyway and bought the novels rather cheaply off the rack and read it before they then went to see it at the cinema. But yeah, my dad deliberately withheld his own information about the Bond films because he just wanted to. I guess he just wanted to see his own kids react to a film in a way they hadn't. This is a guy that went with Goldfinger. He bought the corgi toy and the ejecting characters out of the seat from his own corgi toy. He lost it, and then he wasn't allowed to replace it. So there's a class in there too. But yeah, he just loved watching his kids react to films.
Well, from one side of the pond to the other, Mr. Zaritsky, how about you? What was your first introduction to Sean Connery?
It's great to hear Llewella because there's two things that we have in common at a minimum, and that is dads and rain. Because I remember very distinctly my first Bond film, which was not Sean Connery, it was a Roger Moore film. It was Spy, because we were in Atlantic City, New Jersey. When you're at the beach and it rains, what do? You go to the aquarium or you go to a movie. And my dad was a huge Bond fan. I didn't know that. I was a young man. I was into Batman, Adam West Batman, so that shows my age. And we saw this insane film of a guy with metal teeth, sharks, and I was hooked. In fact, they would always buy my brother and I a toy. He got the usual Corgi Batmobile, and I wound up getting the Aston Martin because he said that's a James Bond car. It was a week later that I got introduced to Sean Connery. And maybe this is why I'm so damaged, but my father came running in. I remember like it was yesterday, came running into my room. And this was not a father who played ball in the backyard with me. And it's not a sad story. It's just he was a very busy entrepreneur, ran his own business.
Yeah.
But he ran in excited to say, there is another Bond film on TV. And this was ABC, Channel 7 in New York. And it had just started, and it was Diamonds Are Forever.
Oh, wow.
And I remember watching this, and I'm like, that is not the same guy that I saw. But I had no problems with it. It was perfect for my age. It was wacky and fun. And I'll take a page out of Llewella's book and say that it provided exactly what I needed as a young man. Same thing as Star Wars, escapism. And even as a child, I found that there was escapism. And although we may ding Connery shortly for Diamonds Are Forever with some of our choices, I found him to just be like, kind of like that pinnacle, that representation of that swarmy, charming person, even as a young man. So yeah, that was my first foray into Connery.
And it's interesting as well, with Spy being your first and Diamonds being days later, they both were on that sort of, should we say, the campier side of things. So there's a nice sort of through line as you wind your way back into something like From Russia with Love or Dr. No. You had to build into that. So you got more serious as you went along.
That's right. And as you can imagine, it was a cascade of my father saying, oh, you like this? So every time a Bond film was on, excuse the pun, that was our bonding moment. He would say, hurry up. I'm going to let you stay up late. There's a Bond film on. And I'm damaged goods ever since.
That's right. This is the home of it. So you're in good company here.
It's the same over in Britain, because when my brother and I were growing up and we were watching the Bond films on ITV. There was always a break just before the news. And if we'd really behaved ourselves, my dad would let us stay up in inverted commas to watch the rest of the Bond film. Now, with hindsight, he was always going to let us do that. But there is that moment of, if you behave, you can watch the rest. You know, it was a treat. So, yeah, I really connect with David over that because, you know, behaviour and watching Bond films is totally linked. But it's a class thing as well, isn't it? You know.
Oh, yeah.
Well, speaking of damaged goods, how about you, Cam?
My story is actually not that dissimilar to David's, where I was also a Batman 66 guy. And my father, one night, we were at my sister's soccer game, and the weather was kind of lousy, and he said, we're ordering in pizza tonight, and we're going to watch a James Bond movie, which meant absolutely nothing to me. And for me, it was also a Roger Moore. It was View to a Kill. And my sister and I both fell in love with it. And it was very important to my dad, I think, to show us Roger Moore Bond films. The other ones, not so much. So we'd go out and rent Spy Who Loved Me, Moonraker. We went through them all, but at a certain point we ran out. And so my dad kept referencing, or my mom would reference, seeing Goldfinger. And it was like, oh, I guess we could rent them Goldfinger. I guess we're out of the Roger Moores. And so I saw Goldfinger and Thunderball fairly shortly after. But I remember what kind of threw the brakes on for me with Connery was that while I enjoyed both of those two, after that I taped From Russia with Love off TV and watched it, and I was like, this is not what Roger Moore is doing on, you know, his Bond films, whereas Thunderball and Goldfinger felt a little more akin to what Roger Moore is doing, especially in, say, The Spy Who Loved Me. So it definitely took me some time to adjust to Connery, and I didn't even see You Only Live Twice and Diamonds Are Forever for years later. It was quite a while until they put them out on VHS tapes. I started buying them up. Then I finally saw them. But for me, it was much more of a later in life coming to appreciate Connery.
It's interesting that one took a while for you, Cam, because you always reference A View to a Kill as your starting point. So I always sort of use that as a barometer for your taste.
Sure, yes, that sums up all of my movie taste is View to a Kill.
It really does. It really does. But I'm glad that your parents came around, and Goldfinger's a great place to start. And I think bringing it all full circle, my first was Diamonds Are Forever.
Wow.
We're connecting it all up. I have a huge love for Las Vegas. I have for a very long time. I met Cam in Las Vegas many, many years ago. I was driving a car sideways on two wheels, and he saw me and winked at me. It was all to do. No, I just caught this one on ITV. That's all it was. I remember watching bits of it as a kid and thinking, this is interesting. And I mean, we weren't a very spy movie household growing up. I mean, the Pierce Brosnan films were definitely the first ones I saw in theaters. But on home movies, on copying it off of TV onto VHS, it was Diamonds Are Forever. I remember the moon buggy is the bit that always stuck with me. It's insane, and I still have mixed feelings about Diamonds Are Forever, but what a place to start.
I actually have that Eagle Moss moon buggy little diorama that they put out.
Same. Guilty.
Great purchase.
Why wouldn't you? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of Connery, you know, this is a man who stepped off a building site and became an icon. In the space of 10 years, launched a brand that's still going now that we're talking about in 2024. With other people, of course, it was more than one man, but he was the face of that movement. He is, for many people, the definitive article of James Bond. So the next question we're going to look at is sort of what Connery meant to the Bond franchise. So I'm going to throw to David for this one first. What do you think Sean Connery meant to the James Bond franchise?
Yeah, and this is going to be just touched with a bit of history, but incredibly biased because Sean Connery remains my favorite James Bond actor today. Everybody says when you're a Bond fan, they always ask the same question: who's your favorite Bond and what's your favorite movie? And I say Casino Royale movie, which confuses them because the next thing I say is Sean Connery. But he brought more than just a template. That is the sexy, usual thing that people say. Oh, he was the template for Bond, and that's everybody's go-to. And I'm not saying that's lazy, but it's more than that. He defined the kind of this blend. That's how I think of it. This blend of charisma, suave, sophistication, this whole idea, and call it what it is, you can burn down my house after this rugged masculinity that I think people just connected with, that ability to sort of do anything. I think people call it privilege, if you will, in the face of a very different type of hero, this anti-hero. Because, heroes before this, a lot of them wore white hats, and they were perfect and angelic. And suddenly you had somebody that, my gosh, they're smacking people around, but I know I'm supposed to root for them, but I don't want to root for them. And I sort of want to be them, but I don't want to be that aspect of them. So there's this wonderful creation in the franchise of somebody that, I'll use the word, and it's a psychological word, they could project themselves into. Before that, you take Superman, for example. Nobody's as goody two-shoes as Superman, so it's hard for people to connect to them. But a Peter Parker or, somebody like that, or James Bond, yes, I'm fallible. I've sinned. I've done a lot of things. And now here's this hero. Then you've got the launch. I mean, you said it yourself. I mean, it's launched merchandising. That happened in the 60s, the great spy craze, which we're kind of missing right now a little bit. We wish it was here a little bit more. But that really started and sparked so many things. And I'll tell you something just really quick, and I don't want to monopolize this conversation because Llewella is going to bring a wealth of this to it. I've heard now in marketing terms, when you deal with the powers that be, and that could either be, whoever you want to think that is, brands or otherwise, one of the things that they're re-engaging on is the family dynamic of people liking Bond based off of Oppenheimer and Barbie. And, there were family units that would go, I'll go see Barbie if you see Oppenheimer. And then $2 billion later, they have a success. Now they're thinking about that like with Bond. And I think Connery set the tone of families being able to go to something and really escape together. And when I hear Llewella or all of you talk about your fathers and your mothers and your family introducing each other, I think about my kids, and I'm doing the same. And so he launched a heritage. He launched an heirloom of movie making that we just can't get over.
I hear like a bit of emotion in your tone there, David, and I think that's something.
I'm going to cry, damn it.
You should. I mean, the guy deserves his flowers, and I hope part of this episode is him getting some flowers. Emotion is a very powerful thing because this whole family connection is definitely there. I didn't mention family in mine because I had a bit of an interesting upbringing. But if I were to have a family later on in life, I would want to pass this love of spy movies down to them, and I would do that through the route of James Bond. Of course, there are some Bond films I probably wouldn't recommend as good starting points, but there are many that I think are very accessible for kids, and I think Connery has a few of them. And you mentioned Llewella and Llewella's thoughts, and I will go to Llewella in a second, but I want to jump to Cam because there's the other family connection there that I want to talk about. But what do you think, Cam, Connery meant to the Bond franchise?
I really was thinking about this because so often people say Connery did it first. And I'm like, well, that I don't want to kind of jump there initially because that kind of is the standard go-to for him. And I mean, there's often the kind of the belief that Connery was the best and they just kind of leave it at that. And maybe that is now more in question because of post Daniel Craig. People have very strong feelings about Craig being a little more of a combatant against Connery for that title. But when I was growing up, there was just no question. And I think the thing that I walked away from kind of doing my revisit this time was Connery, it's not that he did it first, he did it all. When you look at the various facets of James Bond, the physicality of Daniel Craig, Connery did that. The humor of Roger Moore, Connery did that too. You can basically go down the line and look at every Bond actor that's followed. They are all basically tackling it from an angle that Connery managed to somehow achieve over the course of his run. He starts off doing gritty, stripped-down espionage in Dr. No and From Russia with Love. He does the superheroic kind of stuff in Goldfinger and Thunderball. And then you get to Diamonds, which is the full-blown, campy, having fun, being silly like Roger Moore does. And somehow it feels like a cohesive era, and yet Connery is managing over the period of his performances to kind of shift directions to play Bond in different ways each time and somehow making it feel like that's just Connery Bond. And yet when you look at someone like Daniel Craig, it's a very set performance style across all the films. He's great, but it doesn't feel like an actor who's shifting up the tones. Whereas Connery did it just so absolutely perfectly and made it look easy and managed to capture the spirit of the literary character. The they always talk about how he was basically like moved like a panther. The physicality is all there. When you look at, the James Bond actors that follow and the one we're going to have announced, sometime in the short future, you can guarantee there's an aspect they're going to tackle it from that Connery probably already nailed.
I'd never really looked at it that way. Connery did it first. Interesting. Anyone got any thoughts on Cam's point there? I'll throw it out to the team. David, Llewella?
I mean, I think you nailed it in a big way. I think about when people describe actors like Brosnan, they'll often say, he's got the wit of Roger Moore, but the suave, coolness of Connery. Like it's always Connery's in the mix when they describe something. The toughness that Daniel Craig is described as is a Connery-esque type of thing. So there is that template. And I like how you say that he's done it first, which it holds more than just a chronological tableau. It's more than that.
I don't think he only shot half a film and left, though. He didn't do the Peter Sellers.
That's true. He didn't quite do the Peter Sellers or the Woody Allen or the David Niven.
Actually, one person I would like to shout out here as the first screen Bond is Barry Nelson.
Mm-hmm.
Climax, ! Casino Royale, 1954. Just while we're talking about first screen Bond.
No, you're quite right. It's an interesting show. I always think, I always wonder what a Sean Connery Casino Royale would have looked like. He's probably my next choice after Daniel Craig to have seen in that film. One for the imagination. I won't talk too much about it because the blurb I wrote down in my notes was like, Blueprint's been overdone, and both David and Cam have both said that exact thing, and it's true because it has been overdone. What I want to say is Connery has. We'll talk about legacy later. What he means to the Bond franchise. I feel like all of my words have been said, and it's funny because I want to throw to Llewella to sort of disguise my ineptitude in this discussion. I'll tell you what he means. He is a touchstone for all Bond fans. All generations have had a moment with Sean Connery's films, be that the silly ones that Cam mentioned, or the serious ones like From Russia with Love. Sean Connery has managed to create a body of work as James Bond that will stand the test of time, and I think probably longer than some of his counterparts. And that's not a knock on any of his counterparts. It's just, I think, when you look at it, say in another 60 years' time, we're doing 120 years of Bond, I think people will still be referencing the Sean Connery films more than necessarily Timothy Dalton.
Sure.
That's not a knock on any person. I just think that's his contribution. So that's maybe what he meant to it. I'll throw it to Llewella because I think this is a very important question. I think you might have some interesting insights on this one. Llewella, what do you think Connery meant to the Bond franchise?
I want to go back to a phrase that David used actually, which was blend, which I thought was perfect because I think, right, so in terms of cinematic Bond, being the first Bond, what Connery's casting does so well is accent and physique. Connery really has this kind of classless quality to him. He's not the gentleman hero of David Niven, this kind of Britishness that's kind of RP language because critics have been mentioned as well. A lot of critics at the time were very confused by Connery's accent in Dr. No. I mean, a lot of Americans and some British people believe that he's got an Irish accent. His Edinburgh accent is Irish to them. But also he does exhibit the otherness that Fleming really encapsulates in his novels. And something else that Connery does is actually influence the novels in no other way that any other actor has ever done. Fleming, very much adopts Connery's, Scottishness in his later novels. He adopts Ursula Andress in Majesties, for example. And just Connery captures that classness, but at the same time is so classy while he does it. And I mean, something else that's been picked up on is the critics' responses. When you look at every other Bond to have been cast since, they're all connected back to Connery. even Daniel Craig, there's always a comparison of, oh, well, what is he like against Connery? There's no other Bond that kind of exemplifies that. Even though Connery himself tried to distance himself from the character, there is no distancing Connery from that character. It's very difficult to talk about because obviously so many fans have so many opinions, but there is that kind of longevity of Connery. And even now, I mean, speaking as a woman here and a heterosexual woman, Connery's still sexy, he just is, compared to some of the other Bonds, he just is,
Speaking as a non-heterosexual man, I agree.
There you go. See?
We all love him.
We're all a winner. Everyone's a winner.
Yeah.
But I think, though, it is interesting because Connery, unlike the others, because he is the first cinematic Bond, and he makes this impact, he impacts on Fleming's own writing of the character. No other actor can say that. He actually gives him a Scottish heritage because of Connery. That alone, is amazing.
I want to tie together David and Llewella's points there because I think there's an interesting parallel, and that's this. Llewella, you mentioned classlessness, and David, you mentioned I can't remember the exact words you used, but in my mind the word cipher popped up. I think he's one of the best Bond ciphers that we can imprint ourselves upon. He is someone that we could see ourselves in his shoes. He can fill a room full of people in tuxedos and martinis and feel like he is part of it, but a part of him isn't. And that is how we would feel in that party.
Yeah, I think so. I use projection, which is the same thing basically,
Bang
but
on.
it is, and it's a strong psychological thing. I mean, people use it online today when, you do a commercial and you see somebody that's so impossibly handsome or beautiful. You're like, yeah, okay, whatever. But then you see somebody that's a little bit more relevant or relatable to you. And I think what Connery does well, and many, many of the Bond actors, is they make it relatable. Yes, he's incredibly handsome. Yes, people swoon over, but you wish you could say exactly the right thing to a bad guy as they're about to dispatch you. You wish you could get out of trouble and be effortlessly charming and speak effortlessly, David. All these different things Connery's Bond and many of the Bonds bring to the table. So you get so wrapped up into it, which is why I tell people when I'm watching a Connery film with somebody that's never seen a Connery film, I get nervous. Like I'm watching my child in a piano recital and I'm like, oh, are they enjoying themselves? Do they find that he's misogynistic? Like I'm really going through my head, like I want him to do well to this new person who's to the fold.
And I always found it interesting too with Connery that he seemed to have maybe the most difficult relationship with the role of the many actors that played Bond since. Roger Moore was always very fond of the character. Like a lot of them were. I always felt like Connery was a little misunderstood because he obviously had issues with the Broccoli family and, that leads into Never Say Never Again. But I always go back to reading like the script notes that he was supplying when it came to Bond films. And it seemed like Connery cared so much about the storytelling of Bond that I think a lot of the way we sometimes interpret his sort of perhaps lack of interest is more business related than character or creativity related.
You've got to remember that he was the cheapest Bond at £6,000 for Dr. No compared to Roger, etc., etc.
I can't remember which Matt Helm Dean Martin film it was we were reviewing many moons ago, but hearing how much Dino got paid to do one Matt Helm film, I think was the first three Connery films or 4 Connery films put together, what he got paid for those films, something ridiculous like that, maybe even more. And you can understand his reluctancy to keep going, especially how he was treated in shooting You Only Live Twice. I can understand that, and also he was clearly a man that cared about his craft. I think he's one of the most highly decorated actors to play James Bond.
Yeah.
So far, at least. Obviously, some of them are still with us and still acting and still performing and giving great performances. But the Oscar for Untouchables, stuff like that, that's not something everyone has done.
Yeah, he's the only Oscar winner to play Bond, I believe, isn't he? I think so.
I mean, he was working with people like Hitchcock. I mean, he was getting decent jobs in between, obviously before the 70s and 80s, but he was on a great roll. And so to be undervalued, and to your point, Scott, to have those situations where his privacy was being invaded, I think could take the shine off of anyone.
Yeah, and he was learning like what it means to play James Bond first. Like all the other actors, when they sign on, they have a certain sense as to what they're walking into. And sometimes that's a struggle for actors to consider taking the role because they know the pressure they'll be under. Whereas like Connery kind of walks into it, kind of a struggling younger actor. You know, he's coming off of Darby O'Gill and The Little People, and then he jumps into something like Dr. No, and then next thing you know, he's a worldwide phenomenon. And oh my God, how do I deal with this?
And I think that kind of leads me and us into the next topic, which is what Connery brought instead of more what Connery meant. And we have kind of discussed the cipher side of things. And what I wanted to start the conversation off is I always think with Connery is I think he's just really great at being adaptable, because this whole idea of they molded him into this vision of what the cinematic Bond should look like, because obviously the guy they were delivered after Darby O'Gill and The Little People is not quite the Connery we saw on screen in Doctor No. There was a slight transformation that happened there. Savile Row and a few other bits and bobs were visited, I imagine. But I think another actor could turn their nose up at that concept. Cary Grant certainly did. He only wanted to be one film. He wouldn't want to be tied down for many. Sean was happy to throw himself into this role, and throw himself he did, so much so that when 1981, I think, rolled around and it all started rolling and we ended up with 83 and Never Say Never Again, he cared enough about the character to come back. Obviously, there was a cha-ching or two in the background.
Of course.
But, I'm a Never Say Never Again defender, so come at me, folks. I don't mind. And the fact that he came back, because, legacy sequels are all the thing now, but they weren't the thing in 83.
Yeah.
So I'll throw it over. We'll go the other way around from before. Let's go with Cam next. Why don't you talk to us about what you think Connery brought to the Bond role?
Well, so much is said about Terrence Young working with him and getting him the suits and teaching him the lifestyle. And I think you can, as you were kind of saying, Scott, like some people could say, well, he was just kind of molded into the role to fit what they needed. But I think a smart actor isn't molded unless they realize that that's what the performance needs. And so Connery obviously recognized where he might fall short in understanding the character and got a grasp on it by working with Terrence Young and learning about the lifestyle, learning about the style, and kind of giving himself over to what this character needed. And I think what you see is like when you see that first movie, Dr. No, he's bringing that kind of like that Panther-like movement. He's so there's like an intensity that comes through that's mixed with cool. Like the two things just, you don't see many performances in a movie that are just so like radiant off the screen when you see them than him and just Dr. No showing up, his first scene saying Bond, James Bond. I mean, can you do better as an entrance for a character? Pretty tough.
Well, it's the confidence.
Yeah.
Like the confidence to own the screen like he does when, Eunice throws him the line and he comes back with Bond, James Bond. There are not that many people that can have that gravity that early on in their career and hold the screen as much as he does in that scene in the casino.
And I don't know if he was 100% confident, but I think what we learn is like there may have been some fake it till you make it. And he pulls that off. And then the way he evolves his performance, especially into like Goldfinger, that is someone who feels very comfortable in the role and comfortable with their skill set and is still challenging themselves to try different things. So I think the thing with like Connery was he was an actor and he was a really good actor. He was not just someone they found to kind of fill the suit. He was someone who wanted to be challenged, and that's probably why his Bond does change over the course of the movies in terms of the way he's portrayed. It's probably because Connery gets bored. And he's not someone who, when you look at his career outside of that, played the same role over and over again. I think he was always looking at different angles just to keep himself entertained and challenged.
Well, it's interesting that Cam and I both mentioned the look of James Bond, because that was something that Sean Connery helped define. And I haven't really mentioned, but, we do have two experts in the sartorial side of James Bond joining us at this round table. And I think one of the things that Connery brought was that look. And I suppose I'll throw the question to both of you individually, but what did Connery bring to the role? And maybe speak to some of the sartorial side of it too, if you could sort of roll that into your answers. Llewella, how about you first?
Okay, so I guess I mean we've sort of mentioned this previously about what Connery brought to the role in terms of performance,
Mm.
but I'll also add professionalism. I know from some research I'm doing at the moment into the women that worked behind the scenes on James Bond. They always speak about Connery being utmost professional, really lovely to work with, really wonderful in the same in a similar way to Roger Moore as well. So I think that needs to be celebrated too. In terms of sartorial fashion, it's a bit of a complicated one. I'm sure David will perhaps say the same, because it's not just Connery. There's a
No.
whole lot of people behind the look, and not least the cameraman. One of Connery's best suits is captured on the camera in snippets as we go and introduce James Bond. So while his performance is really uber important and particular, at the same time, it's the cameraman, it's the director, it's the person choosing the suit, and it's everyone else. So it's really difficult to, But as I think Cam said as well, it's about performance, isn't it? So the almost feline movements that Connery makes as James Bond that no one else has quite captured, I don't think, in future Bonds. So yeah, it's really complicated. But what I will say is I think Connery's professionalism on set, certainly in his earlier films, and Roger Moore is similar. I think that puts people at ease, and I think that also helps to make a rather lovely family atmosphere that I'm sure we'll come to later in the James Bond films.
It's interesting too. Connery was not a small guy. Like he was 6 foot something, and the way he can move almost feels like a smaller person's agility.
Yeah, and a lot of that is, homage to the sartorial aspects, people like Anthony Sinclair, who knew how people needed to move. And I think one of the things that Connery brings to the table from a sartorial standpoint in that is there's an old adage I say to many people, because I get a lot of questions like, what should be my first suit? And I said, never mind the color or the brand, but either you wear the suit or the suit wears you. And he wore the suit, meaning you own the clothing. You look like the clothing is working for you. And he knew how to work it. When he was in Goldfinger, in that amazing Anthony Sinclair, Prince of Wales check, and he puts his hands in his pocket, and he has that, what we're calling this effortless charm and cool, even with all this diabolical issue around him, it didn't matter because he looked comfortable. I mean, how many times have we been in suits, whether you were young or today, and you feel uncomfortable? You're like, stretching your neck around. You never got that sense. And even when he wore a long sleeve polo, like in Thunderball, and he was creeping around, he had that sort of spy sleekiness. But I'm going to use what Llewella said, and I'll branch off of what Scott said too. Sexy. He brought sexy back. I mean, here was somebody that didn't need to wear, again, a cowboy hat or, toughness. He was impeccably dressed. And you almost got a sense that, Craig says this in his films, this disdain for that type of clothing, he still owned it, and it became a part of the uniform. And so even today, as men and women, all genders, take a look at how do they use that to think about how do they sartorial become themselves. They now use Connery as a template. We all have. Some people use Steve McQueen, Paul Newman. They had Connery. Nowadays, we have Daniel Craig. So he truly set up this whole idea of an entire generation, and many since then following certain style, I'll say, rules and regulations, and for better.
It's interesting when you were explaining the Goldfinger suit just there. This is obviously all on audio, but I can see everyone on video. Llewella had a smile creeping up her face as you were explaining the suit, and it's just there's a love in the room for that look. It feels like
There's a love heart shape going on with our hands.
I can't do the heart thing. If this wasn't a podcast, you'd see me butchering it.
We're trying our best. Yeah. It is a particularly beautiful suit, isn't it, David? I know we both agree.
It's beautiful
on that.
Yeah.
The quality and Anthony Sinclair. I mean, his daughter's still, talking and everything else, and also Frank Foster's shirts as well. should get a special mention. But it is a particularly beautiful suit that photographs amazingly well. But it's also about, as David said, the man who is in the suit and who is wearing the suit, because it's all very well turning up to a tailor and saying, I want this suit. It's like, yeah, but does that suit you? Go and read The Tailor of Panama. It will explain to you. John le Carre speak about how you go about your getting the right tailor for you. And Pierce Brosnan, of course, was in The Tailor of Panama. So there you go. There's a nice connection there.
2 degrees of separation. And I will say this too, Connery, Llewella's got a great point. You got to talk about the man wearing these clothes in the suit. He brought danger to the sartorial aspect. Imagine a suit being danger. But I mean, I watch things like, again, Thunderball or From Russia with Love is a perfect example of when he's with Quirrell and he has that first fight with Quirrell and Dr. No, and he's got a little bead of sweat going on, but he looks dangerous. He looks like he could hurt you. So it's that respect level he's brought back to these types of clothing. It's amazing.
I was just saying there's a bit of an anti-hero element to him, isn't there? Because in a British context, we're so familiar with seeing David Niven and Ronald Colman in these kind of suits, these gentleman hero types. And yet Connery comes along wearing this beautiful suit, performing his very slinky cat-like role. And that is the complete antithesis to the British of what a gentleman hero looks like. And yet we're all believing in him. And it's fascinating.
I think of that scene where he kills Dr. Dent in Dr. No. And he's sitting there in just like the shirt and the pants. And it's like this perfect image of like gentlemanly cool doing something really quite heinous. I don't know that you see Bond kill people in such a dark way in many movies. And somehow he looks so good. He has this just coolness factor about him that somehow the character is able to keep on going through the movie and you're still with him. There's never that point where you pivot and go, I think maybe I should question my loyalty to this character.
Well, tying everything together there, Cam, you mentioned cool, and we mentioned sexiness, and we mentioned, Connery bringing that to the role. Contextualizing Connery's major era, which is the 60s, we've got the counterculture, we've got the hippie movement, we've got people moving away from stuffy suits and we're wearing flowers and it's all that sort of thing. That's towards the end of the 60s, of course. But Britain was used to, in the 50s and the early 60s, everyone was in suits, well-dressed, and it was just the way it was. It was stuffy, it was just how everyone dressed. Connery was able to cut through that noise and present himself in a way that was somehow cool and sexy at the same time, whilst the counterculture was splitting off into the hippie movement and stuff like that. And obviously, Lazenby dealt with that in his own way in the late 60s with the counterculture, but Connery was able to maintain his relevancy in a sea of where other people were going their other way and saying, this isn't cool anymore. Connery was still cool.
Unless he was slugging the Beatles.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to come to the defense of the Blue Romper either myself, but...
Hey, don't knock it till you try it.
I've seen you in it, David. You look fabulous.
It bunches inappropriately, but it's worth the discomfort. That's all I'm saying.
There's a lot of leg on show. But that's
no leg. I'm sorry. You have to cut that out.
Oh boy. No, that's taking us right into the next segment.
Sorry, Mom.
Well, David, you mentioned your legs. That might be one of our worst moments, but who knows? But let's talk about best and worst. It's your favorite segment, folks. You love us doing the best and worst here. We're going to talk about the best and worst of the Connery era. And now we haven't mentioned it too much, but we are including Never Say Never Again in this discussion. Never Say Never Again is up for grabs. He's got 7 films, and as I say, I'm a defender of it. The first in our best and worst categories is villains. Now, this is both big bads and henchmen. They're all applicable. It's all to play for. The best and the worst villains of the Connery era. I'm going to start us off with Llewella.
Thank you. That's a discerning thank you. Right. I've heard your podcast before. Apparently, I'm allowed to nominate more than one.
Oh, she's going controversial at the start,
Llewella. I listened in.
They're going to write in.
The podcast you sent me. I was like, oh, there's more than one. Anyway,
We've
right.
we've broken it in day one. It's the first hurdle. Come on, Llewella, what do you have? Best villain.
Right, okay. So these are the three. Well, four.
3.
I've actually got five. I'm limiting it down. Right, so, okay. I've got to say Robert Shaw, Red Grant, because he's absolutely gorgeous. And I also believe that in a fight against Sean Connery's Bonds, they are the two that are the most believable in terms of fighting in a small room. And I'm not sure which one should win, but yeah, anyway. So I'm going to go with Red Grant. I'm going to go... Right, I'm assuming Bond Girls is a little bit different, so I've got to have Fiona Volpe in there because, again,
Yeah.
she is just amazing. But also, I'm gonna throw a funny one in here. I was gonna say Dr. No, but what I'm actually gonna suggest instead is Blofeld's cat, because Blofeld always seems to survive, and I'm pretty sure that cat is the brains of the operation for Spectre. That cat survives every single film, including post No Time to Die. That's got to be thrown in there. So yeah, we're going to go with a debate between, for me anyway, Red Grant, Fiona Volpe, and the cat.
I would argue the cat gives a more consistent performance across the board than the various Blofeld actors.
Exactly.
I was going to say, I know at least on the set of You Only Live Twice, the cat was definitely the villain.
Well, yes.
Wait, so was the cat voted as your worst villain or still in the best?
Oh no, the cat's in the best villains because the cat survived.
So you've got 3 in the best.
I've got 3 in the best.
I mean, I'm gonna have to poke you for one of the 3. Come on, well, you can give us one of the 3. I think it's Red Grant.
Okay, come on. We know who I'm going to vote for, and it's got to be Robert Shaw's Red Grant. It's got to be.
Yeah.
But you have given me a beautiful segue there, because I haven't mentioned yet. But next week we have a very special interview. And you mention a certain Thunderball star there. A certain Fiona Volpe.
Oh, she's gorgeous, isn't she?
She is, and she will be even better in your ears next week because we are joined by the one and only Luciana Paluzzi. It's a wonderful, wonderful chat. She is very generous with her time. We talk all about Bond and some of the other stuff she's worked into past Bond. Her career went on a lot longer than Thunderball, with some spy movies too. Join us next week for that. It's great. I'll mention it again at the end. But I want to get back to the best villains. David.
So my best villain, this is probably a lot of people's go-to when it comes to Sean Connery, is Goldfinger. Here it is, the titular naming of the title, but he just does such a good job. I just rewatched this film recently with Calvin Dyson, and we had such a good time, and we walked away saying, you know something? We not almost, we wish he wasn't dubbed because his real voice was fine, Gerfrobe. But I had so much enjoyment watching him and so much fun. And my favorite Bond films are the ones where you forget that you're watching a movie and you are a part of it. And he just brings you in. And I have watched Bond films, we all have, where you're sort of waiting in between scenes. They're the Bond scenes and then there's the other scenes.
Yeah.
But with Goldfinger, the ones that just have Goldfinger are as sumptuous and wonderful as anything else. So yeah, he was my best of the Connery villains.
I can't fault the choice. It was certainly in contention for me, but Cam, I want to hear from you.
I am in the same boat. It was actually Goldfinger. I did have a note, though. I had Fiona Volpe, Red Grant, and Rosa Klebb listed as my backups there, because I definitely was fighting more so to choose with Connery than I did with Brosnan. That one was actually pretty easy for me. But there's something about Goldfinger and that, I mean, pardon the pun, but he is like the gold standard, and he's the one that they've always been chasing. And so it's like, how do I not pick him? Because when I look at the ones that come after, it's like Largo. Oh, well, he's good, but he's no Goldfinger. Oh, and you kind of go, oh, Blofeld. Oh, he was fun, but he's no Goldfinger. And there's something about, Gert Frobe's performance. The lines are incredible. He's so quotable, the Goldfinger character. All the accoutrement around him, Whether it's, the costumes he wears, having Oddjob there, his car, every aspect of it feels so well thought out. It is just absolutely perfect comic book villain. And the Craig era villains, there's some good ones there, but I still feel like they're chasing a Goldfinger.
I mean, it sounds like you and David have been sipping on mint juleps in preparation for this.
Not too tart.
No,
Yeah.
of course, and it's a fair point though, because in many times after Goldfinger, they've tried to have Goldfinger's brother or a clone of Goldfinger, other sort of wacky doodle things to try and get Goldfinger back. There's a reason they go back to it, but I'm going to throw mine in here, and I'm going back to Llewella. It's Red Grant.
Yeah.
He's the only one I think in a fight could take James Bond, and almost did. I think that makes him the best villain because he's the one who could have succeeded.
That's very true.
But that means we've got a dead heat for best. It's 2 for Red Grant and 2 for Goldfinger. I'll let you all decide at home. Write us in who you think wins out of those two. We'd be keen to hear from you. I wouldn't want to know who wins out of a fight between those two, though. I think Red Grant's taking it in a fight.
Just a little
it's a
bit.
slaughter.
Unless he had Oddjob with him to throw the hat, I suppose.
Oh,
Ah.
But that's
good odd
cheating.
job.
That is cheating,
Yeah, that is cheating. Although I will note, we gave Llewella flack for having 4 choices, but Cam had 3 backups. So
That's true.
Yeah. And I only listened to your previous podcast, so I was just following form for Pierce Brosnan.
I can't fault you. You did your homework, and I appreciate that. But we talk about Cam. We talk about the worst villain. I'm giving Cam a lot of stick in this episode. I'm really sorry.
I was like, wait, what?
Well, I need segues. But let's go back the same order as before. Who is the worst villain for you, Llewella?
I like the way I'm being picked on first, every time.
I'll change it next time. Don't worry.
Villains. Yeah, these ones don't want to be. Okay, right. Again, I've got a group of them, but you're going to push
gaggle
into them. So I'm actually going to say, not a massive fan of Blofeld in You Only Live Twice or Never Say Never Again.
Right.
Nor am I a fan of Shady Tree, as much as I love Diamonds.
Shady Tree
No.
shout out. Incredible.
Mr. Osato either. He's pretty useless. So,
I had that in my contention.
But yeah, I'm going to go with Shady Tree because he is pretty useless and no one really knows
Bold
why
choice.
he's there. So yeah, Shady Tree. By the way, I love Diamonds and I absolutely love Winton Kid, but Shady Tree can go do one.
And his acting skills.
I know. His comedic skills as well are even more dubious than his acting skills. So
Yeah.
yeah, Shady Tree.
So many people listening are nodding their heads at the Shady Tree, throwing shade at Shady Tree. We'll keep the order before. David, you're up. Who's your worst villain?
Yeah, I'm going to have to go with somebody that to me was so vanilla and so neutral that they just blended in. And every time I bring up this henchman, people are like, who? Which movie? And that is Hans from You Only Live Twice. And your synapse fires. Look at it. You can't see this because it's a podcast, but people are turning their heads like Hans. He's the Stampa type that works for Blofeld that winds up meeting his demise by Piranha. But yeah, Hans. I'm going to have to go with Hans as the worst Connery villain.
He's that bad that he's deleted himself from my memory. That's atrocious.
Exactly.
Wow.
And he's in the movie quite a bit. He's there. He's present.
Cam is nodding like I should know. Llewella's nodding like I should know. I look a fool. This is fine.
Give
I'm
up
used
your
to it.
James Bond fan card, please. Just hand it over.
It's I think it's actually sat here. So
Yeah.
I'd have to hand it in. Okay, so 1 for Shady Tree, 1 for Hans. We're really going deep cuts here. I like it. Cam, can you keep the train going?
I have Hans from You Only Live Twice.
Hooray.
Here's the thing about Hans. I think I saw the movies in the wrong order, in a way, for Hans to ever succeed, because I was brought up with Jaws and Oddjob and all these great henchmen. And I remember watching, You Only Live Twice further down the road and just being like, what? Like, there was nothing to the character whatsoever. It was just tall blonde guy. He didn't even have, say, the personality of the villain from, like, For Your Eyes Only, We were like, well, he's a little generic, but you know what? He can ski pretty well. Hans, I can't tell you anything other than the piranha death.
I think Hans might be walking away with this one because mine is not been mentioned. So I think we have our winner. Originally, I was actually going to go with Blofeld from Diamonds Are Forever. I know there's like quizzical looks at me now across the screen. People are hurling a rotten root at me. I can feel the hatred online. I'm sorry, but I didn't go with that choice. So forgive me. What I went with, and I shouldn't have done this because I'm a big defender of Never Say Never Again. I defended online a lot, and I get a lot of flack for it. But I just can't stand Largo in that film. I think he is. I think Klaus Maria Brandau is a great actor. I think he's great in The Russia House, another spy movie came out a few years before. But afterwards, I should say. But he makes the cardinal sin of basically letting Bond get away scot-free worse than any other Bond villain in any other Bond film when he chains him up in the castle and basically just leaves him in a room full of vultures and just buggers off. And I constantly find myself scratching my head. Plus, his plan is awful, but you can't fault that too much. But the whole idea of just leaving him chained up with no guards whatsoever just rubs me the wrong way in that film. And also, his torture device is a video game, which I don't find any torture in video games myself.
You're playing the wrong ones.
Yeah, that could be true, actually.
By the way, I don't like that film. I know you're a fan of that film. I'm not crazy about it. It's probably number 26 out of 25 films for me. But I will say I like him. I like his performance. I like his moxie. I like what he did with the role, that it wasn't a carbon copy of the Thunderball original. And wow, yeah, okay.
He, for me, is the reason I mark it down. Otherwise, I think it would be much higher up on my list if it wasn't for Klaus in that one. Yeah, happy to have that debate any day about Never Say Never Again, folks. Let me know. But it doesn't matter because Hans, the forgettable Hans, baby, from You Only Live Twice, is winning the worst villain of the Connery era. Who would have thought?
Hans wins, Hans down.
Ooh, that's good.
Come on.
Beautiful.
I am a dad. I'm allowed to do dad jokes, I think.
I mean, you just segued us. That's so good that I just moved into the next section. Well done. From villains, we're going to gadgets and we're going to flip the order. So I'll start us off on this one. Best gadget. And we mentioned this. Cab rode in this episode wearing this and this alone. It is the jetpack.
Okay.
I don't think it gets much better or iconic for the Connery era than the jetpack. Less said about the landing and the helmet, the better. But that moment he takes off, you all wanted to be wearing that jetpack, and I dare you say that you didn't.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I don't know. You go straight up and straight down, I guess. Wow. Sure.
Pop.
Cam, not a jetpack fan. Don't give him your jetpack, folks. Cam doesn't need it. Okay. I'm getting bite back from my co-host here. I hope you're all with me on the jetpack. There's plenty of room for you all aboard. But I'll go back the other way. So, Cam, what's your best gadget?
I had the DB5, the gadget-laden DB5. I mean, it has everything. It's got the bullet shields. It has the ejector seat. It has everything you'd ever want. And I think it is the most iconic gadget of the Connery era. Now, I guess you could argue, is it a vehicle? Is it a gadget? But we don't have a vehicle category, so I'm throwing it here.
I probably should have thought about having a vehicle category, but yeah, okay. I did preface that I am an idiot, so this is fine.
Right.
David, save us. Best gadget.
There'll be no saving. I think it's just so subjective because, I mean, the way I analyze my favorite gadget is the ones that can be something else that they don't appear to be. So a jetpack looks like a jetpack. A DB5 looks like a DB5. It's got hidden gadgets. So that definitely was in contention. But I'm a big believer that with Bond, good things come in small packages. It didn't work on my wedding night. It's not working here.
Where's that blue romper gone?
Exactly. But I'll say this. My choice is the Thunderball breather that he uses. I just love the interaction with Q, first of all, sets the tone. And I do think about my gadgets and how they are set up with Bond. Then how he uses it, to what function, the cool factor. I've got the factory entertainment one downstairs. I love that stupid little thing. It's just so neat. So, yeah, I had to go with my Rorschach test of a thought, and I went to Breather first.
That's a great one. Really
Can't
great.
fault it. And I like the idea about them being sort of gadgets you could just disguise and no one would know. That's a good point. Llewella, what do you have for us?
You're going to hate me for this, but I'm really agreeing with David here on the underwater air breather and Thunderwall because, and to add to everything David said, which I agree with, I absolutely love the story that Peter Lamont tells, which he was rung up by the British military after they saw Thunderball to basically ask, well, how long can you hold your breath underwater with this device, please? Because we'd like to basically buy it. And he was like, well, it's sort of like the magic of the movies, it's all in the edit, but they actually thought it was real. And this is what I like about gadgets and James Bond, is they're believable to a certain extent. So while I absolutely love the jetpack and I would have that as my second, I have to have the underwater breathing gadget, just simply because the British military and perhaps some other military personnel thought it was real. So I'm with David on this one.
I hate to think there was a military somewhere in the world did try and do it and it failed and they looked silly because they couldn't get it to work. I didn't know that about the British though. That's crazy and very us.
I love it. I'm pretty sure the rest of the military run around after watching a Bond film. I mean, it gives so much inspiration, doesn't it?
Well, that's the breathing device is clearly winning the day for best Connery gadget, so it leaves down to me to start us off on the worst. And this one took a bit of thinking because I don't particularly dislike many of them.
Yeah.
And then I realized there was one that just kind of gets forgotten about in the film. And that is the cigarette gun bullet gadget in You Only Live Twice. I know it is briefly in it, but it feels like such an afterthought. We're doing it for the gag in the room as opposed to having applications in the mission. And that's really what rubs me the wrong way. It happens a lot in some of the other spy films we've come across over the years. They just do these scenes to have jokes instead of having applications to the story, or they write it backwards. This just feels like it's more for the gag in the room with the Q-esque scene. And so, yeah, for me, it's the cigarette bullet gun thing, whatever you'd call it.
And that's a real thing too now, or it was. They have it at the Spy Museum in Washington, D.C.
Wow. Okay. So I wonder what came first. What was the chicken and the egg? Was it You Only Live Twice, or was it...
Let's give it to Connery. Yeah.
Yeah. He's the trendsetter. He's our trendsetter this week. Cam, what do you have for worst?
The water walking ball in Diamonds Are Forever.
I forgot about that.
That he uses at the end approaching the
Wow.
the oil platform, because I'm like, that just turns you into a target, like a walking target moving slowly across the top of the water.
And now people pay to go in those things, don't they?
Well, that's different. That's recreational. But in this case, this is a stealth spy gadget.
That's true. That's true. The best was water, used in water. Could the worst be used in water too? We'll find out. David, what do you have for worst?
Okay, staying with Diamonds Are Forever, we have the amazing pre-title sequence, Pocket Mousetrap thingy-mabobby that makes the guy's hand bleed.
Oh, wow.
That's not sexy. That's basically
No.
a mouth. It's a mouth trap is what it is. It's a Jaws mouth trap. That's not right.
Yeah, that's all of the ones we picked so far are pretty, like, they're on the lame side of things, aren't they? They're all just kind of like, these aren't great. But no consensus so far. So, Llewella, can you give us a consensus, or have you got your own one?
I'm afraid not, but it is from Diamonds again, if that helps.
Oh, wow.
I love Diamonds, but right, I had to look this up earlier for the exact terminology of what it's called. It is an electromagnetic RMP controller ring, which is in Diamonds where Q uses the ring to use the slot machines. And the reason I'm voting for that one is because Bond doesn't use it, and Q, when he does use it, doesn't collect the money from the slot machines. So it's a useless gadget, because what is the point of it? Even when they use it, they don't get their winnings. So there you go. But it's from Diamonds. So there's a consensus about Diamonds over gadgets.
Vegas security would be all over you for that. There's
Oh,
no way
man.
that flies. Oh, your legs are getting broken, or you're getting the vice.
What do they call it? 86th? You get 86th and thrown out very quickly. Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
I think we don't have a consensus on the worst gadget, but what we do have a consensus on is that Diamonds Are Forever had very bad luck with gadgets.
Yes.
Yes.
Very true.
I think we can take that with us. And with us, we shall go on to Bond Girls. Best and worst Bond Girls for the Connery era. Why don't we have David lead us on this one? The best, please.
Okay, and I'm going to choose one, but before we do that, Bond girls can also count as the villains, right?
Sure.
Okay, then I've got to go Fiona Volpe, Luciana Paluzzi. She was amazing. To me, she is the best Bond girl of the Connery era for a lot of different reasons. Like you two now are biased. I mean, she's charming in real life. She's wonderful. She's a fan of fans.
Mhm.
So already she goes up several rungs in my view. And she did. Because I think in previous to knowing her or even engaging with her, I think it would have been Pussy Galore because that's the simple, I'll say it, easy one to go to. But Fiona Volpe brings so many dimensions. She's so strong. To me, she is the most equivalent to Connery's Bond in the entire Connery era of people, never mind any gender whatsoever. She's just badass, but she's beautiful and charming. She's effortless in what she does, but she's competitive. I mean, she is the female Bond, and she just did an amazing job. And when she's dispatched, you feel something. It's like, wow, that was weird. I'm feeling for the villain dying. So yeah, best Bond girl, Fiona Volpe.
I think it's a British film critic, Mark Kermode, always says, when you go and see a film, if they can make you feel something, they've been successful.
Right.
And so Fiona Volpe is making you feel something when she is shot. And she is not the main character. She's not even the main villain. That's a tip of the hat to Luciana and her performance in that film. And I mean, that's why we've got her on next week. And I completely get it. It's a wonderful choice, David. Let's go to Cam. What do you have?
I have Pussy Galore.
Mhm.
To me, she just matches Connery so perfectly. Her wit is so sharp, like physicality wise, in terms of just like confidence and just cool factor on screen. Like looks great standing next to Connery. And I find a lot of the time there's such like a formidable presence to Connery that he can kind of tower over co-stars, male or female, doesn't matter who they are. They sometimes kind of like fall away in his stature, whereas I feel like she stands toe to toe with him. And that's a rare feat and just a real tribute to Honor Blackman, just a great performer. So for me, I had to go with Pussy Galore. I was looking for like maybe like outside the box, interesting choice. But when I went down the line, I was like, no, that's the one that for me just jumps to number one.
There's definitely like a handful that really are the top tier in this group of films, I would say. And I'll be interested to see if any more names come out because I'm going to go to Llewella next. Who do you have for best Bond girl of the Connery films?
I've got to give them equal billing, I'm afraid. And it has to be Ursula Andress and Luciana Paluzzi. I think they're both gorgeous women. I think without Ursula Andress, you wouldn't have had any other Bond girl as we know them. And also in every single other film since, in every other single Bond film, there has to be a woman clad in a bikini, a la Ursula Andress. Also, she is, like Luciana Paluzzi, the most lovely of actresses, and it's not just from a fan perspective, but also I've heard costume designers talk when they're asked the question, oh, who's the nicest person to work with? It's always Ursula Andress. She is, despite her beauty and her figure, she is always the nicest down-to-earth woman. A bit like Luciana Paluzzi as well. And that means a lot to costume people, But also, yeah, Fiona Volpe, I remember watching her and a bit like watching, Indiana Jones as a young woman and wanting to be, certain people. Luciana Paluzzi is really cool. And I absolutely love the moment where she lifts the motorbike helmet off her head and you've got this flowing red mane. Just the reveal,
Yeah.
And that moment where Bond gets betrayed by her and he's really insulting to her and she's just like, yeah, whatever, I've got a feather boa. You know, that is amazing. So yeah, I think that's equal billing to Honey Rider and Fiona Volpe.
So as it looks at the moment, Fiona Volpe's got kind of a 1.5,
Yeah, I think that's fine,
shall
yeah.
we say, in terms of
Yeah.
votes. I guess that puts her in the lead. It comes down to me, and for a moment, I was going to be the controversial outsider and stick up for a previous guest on the show, Barbara Carrera, who played Fatima Blush in Never's Never Again. But I think what I was looking at with that is I just wanted my Fiona Volpe fix.
There you go.
And so let's just go with the OG. It's Fiona Volpe.
Yeah.
I'm not biased. She's here next week. She's talking to us. But by golly, does she stand head and shoulders in top of the pile, the group, the team of Bond girls from this era? Because she does something. She learned from what happened before. She took what Ursula Andress did. She took what Honor Blackman did and grew and built on that and gave us this performance that I think the femme fatales of the Bond films have been using as the blueprint. We talk about Connery as the blueprint. Luciana Paluzzi was the blueprint for the femme fatale.
That's what they call détente, Commander.
That scene where she has the clay pigeons too and is shooting them down with the rifle is really fantastic and gives that character like a physicality that you wouldn't normally see in a movie like that.
She does have the best costumes as well.
Mm.
Anthony Mendelsohn designed her costumes. They're absolutely stunning, you know.
But you mentioned the motorcycle helmet and the leathers and the bike and stuff. That was the look for me. That's a good look, solid look. We'll leave it there. But from good, there must be bad. Worst Bond girl of the Connery era. This is a toughie for me, I found. But David, why don't you lead us off?
So I'm going to go over my thinking because I will say one, but I went through Aki, I went through Kissy Suzuki, I went through who else did I have down here? Oh, Ling.
Sure.
All from You Only Live Twice. You know, I give you very best duck. I love the line, but I mean, it's delivered with just a certain amount. But I'll tell you who I went with. This was tough. Tiffany Case, and I'll tell you why. I have fun watching her, but there is such an unevenness to her performance. It's almost like the Marcus Brody of Indiana Jones. In the first half, he's a great thinker, and then suddenly the next film, he's a bumbling idiot. In the first half of the film, she's good, she's on it, she's competent. And then the second half, you know, blow it, as soon as she does the blow it out your whatever, Charlie, then it just all goes downhill, and they turn her into sort of like, you know, just, you know, ditzy. And she could have been one of the strongest, most competent ones in an okay film, but no, it's just, I feel like it's uneven. So I don't like her as a Bond girl.
I can understand that. What about you, Cam?
I actually have Kissy Suzuki.
Okay.
And it is less because of the performance. It's because the movie doesn't even care about Kissy Suzuki.
Sure.
She's introduced way late in the movie. They never give her a name at all. And she basically is just there to be in a bikini and be, you know, action heroine in the finale. But even then, the movie, it just doesn't seem to care. And whereas I look at all the other ones, some of them may be uneven. I may have an issue with them, but the movie is still giving them an identity. With Kissy Suzuki, they're just like, we need another girl to basically wind up with Connery at the end of this movie. So that was why I picked her.
So one for Kissy and one for Tiffany. Connecting up to David, I actually completely agree. I think it, for me, is the wonderful Tiffany Case. And I say wonderful because she's great for the first 45 minutes of the film, and then the film completely forgets to give her any agency whatsoever and has her bumbling around on an oil rig in a bikini for some reason. And I think it's a real shame because you look at, I mean, we've had Jill St. John in The Liquidator from 1965, another spy film where she plays the villainess. That's the big twist of the film. And she is arch and campy and hilarious and great. She's the big villain of the film. She has the range to do it. So the film just chose not to do it with her. And that is the real shame. And even if you look at the source material, Diamonds Are Forever book, Tiffany has more going on in the latter half of the book as well as she does at the beginning too. So it was really just a choice of the filmmakers for Diamonds Are Forever to have this great actress in the film that has these chops and then not score an open goal. And that's the real shame of it. So it's not on her performance. It's on what she was given.
Yeah.
So that's 2 votes for Tiffany Case. Llewella, can you sway the vote?
Well, I think I can. This was one of 2 categories where I only had like 1 entry down for, so it was quite definitive.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I'm going with Cam here. It's Kissy Suzuki.
Wow.
It's not because I see where you're coming from with Jill St. John's character, but before the moment where she's on the oil rig, she is brilliant and
Yeah.
is in keeping with the film. The problem I've got with, I mean, I feel really bad here. I don't think there should be a bad Bond girl, but I get why we have to do this. What is the point of Kissy Suzuki? She literally turns up, she wears a bikini, she jumps down into a volcano with a massive action sequence, and she's literally there, as Roald Dahl said to Playboy, for the bit at the end, wearing a bikini so Bond can get in the boat with her.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know there's more to the novel than this, but in the film, it's just awful. It's just so bad. And also because you've got Aki, who's like an amazing Bond girl, and I know it's in the novel and they kill her off, and it's like, wait, and now we've got the most boring person ever known to Bond wearing the most ridiculous costume for an action sequence. They even put a tunic on her, and that gets lost in the fight. And you're like, what the... I mean, you know, I know Jill St. John runs around in a bikini, but at least they play it for laughs in Diamonds. They're not playing it for laughs in You Only Live Twice. It's a dreadful film, but that's the worst part of it. So, you know, so yeah.
So Llewella, we're gonna mark you as undecided.
Yeah,
There's no passion here whatsoever.
so that's a maybe.
Emphatic.
Sorry, I'm so awful. It's unfunny. And even at the end, when he goes off on the boat with her, it's not even that funny either. I mean, she's supposed to have his baby, according to Fleming's novels. Well, really? I mean, come on. There's just no chemistry there. Sorry. I'll shut up now.
Don't be sorry.
No,
That's
I love the
lovely.
passion.
Yeah,
Bring
this is
it,
what we
bring
like.
it.
It's a passion for You Only Live Twice. It's good to see. But it seems like it's a dead heat. Tiffany and Kissy, 2 votes each. We'll leave it to you, listeners. Who do you think is the worst of the bunch? Let us know. But moving on to allies. People on our side, the backup, the men in the van, the people giving us the intel. Let's go with me first. I don't think I've started this off. Or maybe I have and I've forgotten. The best ally. And I think this is an easy one for me. It's Kerim Bey. It's got to be Kerim Bey. He was, I don't want to use the blueprint thing because that's probably oversaid now, but the familiarity he had with Bond, the connection they shared in that short screen time stayed with me through all of Connery's films. I feel like they never really got anything near that afterwards. Tiger maybe came close. He was another one I thought about, but for me, it's Ali Kerim Bey. What about you, Llewella?
I agree. I think Kerim Bey, I have 2. I have Kerim Bey and I have Lois Maxwell's Moneypenny because she is a great ally.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
But I think it depends how you're defining ally here. But yeah, if you're defining ally by being on a mission and actually going through with it, I think Kerim Bey. If you're defining support role, then Moneypenny, Lois Maxwell, who also, by the way, just as a really sad academic fact, if you ever go into the National Archives in the UK, Lois Maxwell is named in a security service file on her own bat. So there you go. Moneypenny is named in a proper MI5 file back in the 1960s.
Oh, wow, that's
So
cool.
there you go.
It's a great legacy to have.
Basically, she was friends with Joseph Losey, one of Joseph Losey's wives, and they must have had a bit of a spat. So Joseph Losey's one of his wives goes round to stay with Lois Maxwell, and the MI5 security service are following. So they report Lois Maxwell and have her in a file. So I've always thought that's really quite fun. I don't know if you knew she was in an MI5 file, but yeah,
No.
she is.
Maybe we weren't supposed to know. Maybe you've let a state secret out now and it's slipped.
I smell an edit coming.
Well, it's in the National Archives, so it's not a secret anymore. But yeah, 60-year rule or whatever it is. So, yeah.
And I'll throw it to Cam next. Who do you have for best ally?
Karim Bey was my backup.
Okay.
I'm actually going with Tiger Tanaka because when I thought about it, I'm like, and I don't just apply this to James Bond. It's like when you look at a supporting character, would I want to see them in their own movie? Do I want to see the Karim Bey movie?
Yes.
I don't know. Do I want to see the Tiger Tanaka movie? Hell yes. I want to see him working with his ninja school. He seems like a really cool, almost Bond-like agent in his own right. Give me the Japanese Tiger Tanaka spinoff. I will watch it.
Cam, I have something to say to that.
Yes.
I've been meaning to say this actually for a long time. I love you.
You are quite sexyful.
It's a great choice.
Okay, so it seemed like the field's wide open. David, can you level the scoreboard?
No. But I will agree with... so I had to go Karim Bey. Karim Bey. Karim Bey. I had to go there. And I'll tell you what it is, too. All the reasons everybody mentioned, the only one I will add is, again, a death. You know, when a death moves me and you see him crumpled up there, it's like that Mathis moment where you're just like, oh, did they really? You know, I wanted him to go on. I wanted him to be successful and to be this ally. So the loss of him was just pretty robust.
Well, it looks like Karim Bey is winning this one. I'm glad to have a win on my record now. I think I've only got 1 or 2 so far. So that's nice to see. But let's go with the worst, starting off with me. I had to go with Norman Burton's Felix Leiter from Diamonds Are Forever. It may be elementary, but I just don't know what to make of this chap. Is it the most fleeting Felix Leiter in a Bond film? I think maybe between that and Living Daylights, perhaps.
Yeah. Living Daylights people forget a lot too, yeah.
But yeah, his is... I actually for a long time completely forgot he was a Felix Leiter. I always just remember when I watched the film, it's like, oh, that's Felix. He's just that unremarkable. He can't compare to the sex appeal of the one in Goldfinger, who I always forget the name of as well.
The sex appeal.
Is it Keck Linder?
Keck Linder.
You mean when they're looking at him on the in the Fountain Blue and they're...
Yeah, they just can't get enough.
Yeah, well, that was the 60s.
Well,
It was.
he was a well-dressed man.
It was the style at the time.
It certainly was. Llewella, who do you have for worst ally?
Well, I do have to. Sorry. I have Keck Linder, Felix Leiter. But I also have Nigel Smallfawcett.
Oh.
You know, because he only appears like twice, I think, in Never Say Never Again, and he's pretty useless. Now, I know he's played for comic effect, which is a little bit different. So I suppose I'm going to have to go with Keck Linder, because he's not played for comic effect, but he's just not very good as Felix Leiter, unlike Jack Lord, A. Owl, etc. So, yeah, I'm going to go with Keck Linder, Felix Leiter in Goldfinger.
Felix is taking a hammering so far. Cam, can you change it?
Norman Burton as Felix Leiter in Diamonds Are Forever.
Wow.
I feel like people have to Google that one to even remember him.
I Googled his name.
Yeah, he's barely in the movie, and he just... I'm sorry, you can't follow up, like, even Keck Linder. You can't follow up a Keck Linder with this guy. He's just so unmemorable. Even the guy who, was it Rick Van Nutter, I think, in Thunderball? Even he's more memorable.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not a proud history of Felixes in the Connery era, but when you are the worst one, that's dark. That is a bad place to be.
I think I know who's winning this round, but David, who do you have?
Well, just for the sake of variety, Prime Minister, I'm not going to... I didn't name a Felix Leiter.
Wow, okay.
You know. So I went with Henderson from You Only Live Twice. Quick,
right?
Little useless, neutral. I like the actor. I liked him much better as Blofeld later in Diamonds Are Forever. But I just found that character, especially compared to the literary character of Henderson, who was so colorful and interesting and bombastic, this one was just meh to me. So I voted Henderson, but it doesn't matter, does it?
It matters to me. And I'll throw out the question. Does he get Bond's drink wrong on purpose as a spy test?
Oh,
I just think they wrote it wrong.
Yeah.
You're romanticizing it, which I like.
It's all I have.
Yeah.
It's all I have left.
You and your fan fiction.
That's all. That's all I have. I spend my hours writing it, but you know, Norman Burton, we should give him an honorary award for just how badly he's performed. He is our worst ally of the Connery era. Sorry, Norman. I can't think of any more puns for you. But yeah, you deserve your treatment. And the worst Felix of all time, most likely.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Red alert, Spyhards. We are shaking things up over on the Patreon page.
That's right, we are launching an exclusive new show where we tackle the exploits of the small screen's greatest secret agents, like Jack Bauer, George Smiley, and beyond.
And don't forget, every month you also get 2 Agents in the Field episodes where we decode the adventures of your favorite spy actors in their biggest non-spy movies. But Cam, tell the people what we have coming up next.
Well, Scott, now is a fantastic time to catch up with our very diverse offerings that we released in the month of April. I'm talking about reviews of Working Girl and Outland, plus our deep dive into the failed 1988 TV pilot Remo Williams' The Prophecy.
So don't get left out in the cold. Help support your favorite spy movie podcast and join the circus at patreon.com/spyhards. But before this message self-destructs, let's get back to the spy jinx. Let's go to bigger, bombastic action set pieces now. Best set piece of all time. Llewella, lead us off this time. What do you have for the best set piece?
Oh, so the way you described it was action pieces. So, right, I'm going to have to go with, it's not bombastic, but I think it's the best, which is the fight between Bond and Grant in From Russia with Love. It's the most believable sequence, but also the way they set it up. I remember watching it. You've got this wonderful stalking movement going on, where Grant just follows him down and you're just watching. And when he says, come here and kiss my foot, basically. And out of every single Bond film I've ever seen, I think that Robert Shaw and Sean Connery have the most physical equalness, if that's a word. But I believe that you never know, unless you obviously have read the novels or whatever, but you don't know who's going to win that fight. And it's done, I think, the way it's filmed, the way Terence Young films it, and the way it's edited is just brilliant. So I'm going to go with that fight on the Orient Express is the best.
It's a fight they've gone back to a couple of times to try and remake Jaws and Roger Moore.
They've never quite managed it because, as I was saying earlier, James, my husband, it's like, with Roger Moore and Jaws, you've got a massive height difference. Also, Roger, I love him as a Bond, but he's just not physically kind of made the same way as Connery. So Connery, you actually believe, could punch your lights out. And so could Robert Shaw. So it's like, you actually think who's going to win this. If you haven't seen it before, you don't know how it ends. So I'm going to go with that. But there were so many to choose from. It's very difficult.
It's a toughie because the bombastic is one side of it, but just the intensity of some of the other sequences. You think of other things like even in films like Diamonds Are Forever has some great sequences. But I'm keen to hear from myself next. I'm going to jump in. I really want to hear what I have to say. And I was originally going to go with the From Russia with Love train because I effing love that sequence. And I think I mentioned that it's one they've riffed on. Even Hinks and Bond, Inspector, they tried to do it again. Wasn't quite good enough.
Yeah.
But I said, for me, I have a lot of love for You Only Live Twice. I think I don't want to say underrated. I don't think any Bond film can be underrated. It's a Bond film. Overlooked is one I'll say about You Only Live Twice. And that volcano assault for me is the sort of height of spy mania. It's the peak of how big they can go without being ridiculous. It's cool, it's crazy, and they had to build a special set and cut the hole in the roof just to fit it in. How big do you get? You Only Live Twice volcano assault for me is number one there, with From Russia with Love train coming in second. David, what do you have?
This wasn't even difficult for me. And Llewella's choice is unapproachable. I agree. Amazing set and fight and moment. That being said, I went with Volcano because to me, this was the thing that launched toys, the spy craze. It sent people's heads exploding to say, you know where it takes place at the end? It takes place in a volcano. Like they've hit bigger than the moon. It's crazy. So I had to go with the volcano.
Looks like the volcano is set to erupt. Cam, what do you have?
I went with the From Russia with Love fist fight in the train.
Oh,
Once
no!
again.
Yeah.
What a twist!
To me, what's astonishing about it is it's very rare to have a 60s action sequence that to this day they're like, how do we try to replicate that?
Mm-hmm.
Because, action has evolved so much. You could say it's improved a lot the way they choreograph action. Look at the John Wick films now in comparison to like action you'd see in 50s, 40s, 60s movies. We've come a long way. And yet, there's something about this fight that is so primal, so vicious, that even to this day, you mentioned the Hinks fight. They went all out to try to do it. Daniel Craig put himself in the hospital practically to, shoot that sequence. And yet, it doesn't rival what Robert Shaw and Sean Connery pulled off. And so I think there's a magic to that one that just can't be replicated. I did consider the volcano, but to me, I'm always a little bigger on the big battle in The Spy Who Loved Me, which I feel like kind of took that and one-upped it a little bit.
I can't fault that, and I can't fault anyone's choices, especially because David's was the same as mine. But it's an equals 2-2 split, so I'll leave it to you listening at home. Decide and let us know on social media what do you think is the best action set piece from the Connery era. But let's go to the worst. Llewella.
Just before we go on to that, is it okay to have an honorary mention for the Aston Martin driving around where the old woman shoots
Great call.
at the Aston Martin? Because I think that's amazing. That is just one of the funniest moments in a Bond film, where she's got the machine gun and facing down this car, But anyway, in terms of worst ones, this was really hard for me because I think we mentioned this before, but Connery's films and all the people that make them, they don't really put a foot wrong. So it's quite difficult to choose. I hate to say this, but I'm going to go with the back projected car chase, which is on the way to Miss Tarrow's house in Dr. No, because it's pretty bad. I know they're playing around with the genre, and there's some great things in that film. It's got one of the best sets from Ken Adam ever in it. But yeah, that back projected sequence of the car chase to Miss Tarrow's house is pretty not great, is it? So, and yeah, it's followed by a great scene with Dent and being shot in the back. So, that makes up for it. But yeah, that I think is the worst action sequence. But I'm happy for everyone to disagree with me and find some other one.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Dr. No, because I'm going to the other end. 83. And this one brings a tear to my eye. The tears of valor. I'm talking about the final assault, as it were, in the caves, made of paper mache, I can only assume. With Bond and Bernie Casey taking down Largo and his goons, and then a very much a whimper of a finale in the scene as he's stabbed by
Domino,
I guess. But basically, you don't even see her coming. It comes out of nowhere, and it happens very, very fast. There's no build up to it. It feels like that entire last sequence in Never Never Again falls flat, and that's a real shame because it has. I have a lot of time for it, but that last sequence and Largo are what really hold it back for me.
Okay.
What about you, David?
I went with the. And this is some of us own toys from this scene, so you're going to be like, huh?
Oh, no.
But I went with the Diamonds Are Forever moon landing set. And I went very much sets. I didn't do special effects because there's so many special effects moments that are so wonky. But to me, that set just was, what was it doing there? Why?
What is it?
Are they faking the moon landing? Is that the inference? I guess that's what it is, kind of the whole hey, it's fake, this and that. The astronaut moving in slow motion, even though he was in zero gravity, like a method actor, I guess. But to me, that whole thing, minus the moon buggy, which I'll give props for, maybe that would get my best vehicle. I have to give that as the weakest one for the Connerys for me.
We have a very split field. Cam, what do you have?
I'm kind of where David is, where it's like the action in Diamonds Are Forever is rough. So I was looking at the moon buggy. I was looking at the chase on the strip, which winds up in like a car lot and isn't that exciting. But I ended up going with the oil rig shootout and helicopter battle at the end, which has some very poor effects going on with the explosions. And I think it would be less offensive to me if it didn't follow On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which has an all-time helicopter assault sequence that looks absolutely beautiful and incredible. And then I'm jumping over to those oil rigs and watching like an 8-year-old kid do the special effects.
Oh, cruel.
Ugh.
Blofeld making off in his bathysphere or whatever it's called. It's just a weird lineup there. I mean, if I was going to just look at diamonds, I think I'd still be with David on that one, though. I think that moon buggy still makes me scratch my head.
Yeah.
I just don't know why it's in the film. At least you understand it's not a good climax, but I know why it's there. The
Right.
moon buggy doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, if you give me a bad set, but it's somewhat justified and it moves the story along, lovely. Bring it all day. Not this one.
Well, it's 4 split votes, so we can't really bring this cohesiveness to it. But I will just honorarily give it to the moon buggy because I am the one leading the conversation. But feel free to argue with me online, folks. We're moving on now to the last couple of sections in this best and worst, and this is the quips, the one-liners, what Bond is known for in many trailers at least. And if we could hear this in your best impressions of the character too, bonus points if you can do it. I'll certainly give it a try. I think even so, I'll lead us off just to, I'll do my bad one first, and then you can all just be like, at least you weren't as bad as Scott.
Okay.
I'm going for my best quip of the Connery era is his exchange with Fatima Blush when she skis past him and she says, "Oh, I got you all wet." And he goes, "But my martini's still dry. I'm James." I just think that's so cool. And for him to be doing that in 83, way past the prime, if you will, of the 60s, and having still for me one of the best, if not the best one-liner, it's just an easily quotable thing. I've never been in a scenario where someone has made me wet and then said that so I can say it back to them. But one day I'll have the perfect setup where I can say that line back to them. Also, my name isn't James,
Yeah.
but still.
Yeah.
Identity crisis.
I was going to say,
Well,
okay.
I mean, they may not know me, so I could pretend to be James Bond. I've certainly done it before. Let's go to Cam, a man who's known for her terrible accents. Perfect for me to pass on over to him.
So I feel like I have to be dubbed over for this one. So whatever you hear isn't actually me. It's someone else doing the voice acting. No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die. That's my one. Because to me it was like, I thought about shocking, positively shocking. There was a few I thought of, but like that Goldfinger delivery is just an all-time great villain line. And I think it's hard to argue against.
Okay, we're going from Never's Never Again to Goldfinger. Great delivery, Cam. You did well. You did well.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you. It redeemed a little bit from my terrible Pierce Brosnan impression.
Oh, yeah, that was pretty bad. That was pretty bad.
Let's not talk about it anymore. Move on.
Let's go to David. What do you have for best?
So I think I chose one that nobody would have chosen, but we're going to go to Thunderball. After Fiona Volpe drives very quickly to the hotel, and they're at the same hotel, right? You got the scene. And she goes, "Some men don't like to be driven." And he goes, "No, some men don't like to be taken for a ride." And I love that line. I don't know why I love it so much, but to me, it's one of the best quips. It's the best back and forth between the two of them.
It feels like very character driven too. Like it feels like you're getting a little bit of actual insight into the Bond character, whereas a lot of them are more just tossed off.
I also like that me and David so far have picked Bond lines, whereas Cam has given us a non-Bond line. So I wonder what Llewella has in store.
Well, I have to be honest. I did write down plenty because there are so many really brilliant ones. And I mean, just before I do mine, I do want to make the point as well that what's fascinating is it's not really until Diamonds where Connie starts shing his words. So we'll all impersonate, but the funny thing is it's always from Diamonds onwards. But Diamonds does have the best lines, I think, ever. And mine has to be, "Right idea, Mr. Bond, but wrong pushy." It's that. It's got to be that, that moment. And also, I absolutely love Charles Gray's Blofeld because he just hams it up. He camps it up.
Yeah.
He knows it's a bit of a crack character, but he knows, it's just a jump to the left, Mr. Bond. But yeah, but wrong pushy is a great line.
I'm so glad a Rocky Horror reference made it into this episode. I'm very pleased with that.
We were due.
It's one of my favourite films.
It's
so.
one of mine too, so we have that in common. Well, again, like no consensus. The only consensus is
Nope.
Bond gave us the best lines. Right. Okay. Well, let us know your favorites, folks. We want to hear that too. But worst one-liners from the Connery era. And this one I took to heart. I took personally. It was an offense and affront to everything that is me. And this is in a conversation where Connery drops the following line. That's as bad as listening to the Beatles without earmuffs. I'm a Beatles guy. I've seen Ringo. I've seen Paul. I can't stand for that sort of blaspheming on my boys.
Yeah, that may be the most dated moment in any Bond film. Like, it's truly unbelievable.
It's so weird as well. Like around the same time that the Harry Palmer films, $1 Billion Brain's coming out, and also making a joke about the Beatles. It just seems to be in the water.
Yeah.
Okay, Cam, what do you have for worst one-liner?
Elementary, Dr. Leiter.
Norman Burton's back.
Yeah, to me, this line, if you have to, like, Google to figure out what it even means, it's not a good line.
It's a good one.
I'm still not entirely sure what alimentary means.
It's the alimentary canal. It's where it's hidden.
Oh.
So it's a part of the body. It's
Yeah.
anatomy.
Wow.
So if you're in the medical field like me, that slays.
All the conferences, they love it. Okay, David, your worst line.
My worst line is, one of us smells like a touch handkerchief
That's a weird one.
from Diamonds Are Forever.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yeah.
We got to pop out of Llewella there on the camera as well, so I think we have a fan of that line as on that one. But Diamonds has some funny one-liners in it, though. Some funny choices they make there.
They do.
I feel like Connery
Yeah.
is just like unhinged in Diamonds. He'll just do anything.
He's just like your crazy dad in that movie.
Yeah.
Like something snapped. He had a bad day at work. Maybe he was fired. I don't know. But just and then he became a secret agent the next day, and this is the result.
And went to Vegas.
Oh, and went to Vegas.
I would hang out with him in Vegas. I feel like you'd have a good night with Connery in Vegas.
Yeah.
I still like the fact that Connery, going back to sartorial for a moment, in Vegas, everybody else is in like jeans and shorts and flip-flops, and he's wearing a tuxedo amongst all of that rabble. Like, you are not going to stand out at all. But I guess that was part of the campiness of it.
Also, I love his like salmon pink shirt in that. That look always stood out for
The
me.
tie. He had a pink tie.
Is it the tie? Oh no, it was it. Yeah, was it a white shirt with a pink tie?
And it was incredibly short.
I've got a painting of that somewhere in my house. Worst one-liner, Llewella. What do you have?
The one I've got, it was really difficult again because, so many lines are great. But the one I've got is from Thunderball. After he escapes from the Shark Tank thing, and he goes, you can tell of the one that got away. It's just a bit rubbish, really, compared to all these other one-liners that you have,
Like it just didn't land.
And
Yeah.
I absolutely love all your worst ones from Diamonds because I just find them hilarious. Everything else. I think that what I love about Diamonds is it's just laugh a minute Bond. Everything about that film is just hilarious, and I enjoy watching it every time I see it. Whereas that bit in Thunderball is just like, what really? It's positive.
You're proving a point. None of us could agree on a worst line, and all of us have different approaches to Diamonds Are Forever. It's just such a wide array of films he put out for us to love and also not love at times. Speaking of other films, best and worst song. Second to last category. This will be an easy one, I think, for a lot of us. I think there might be a consensus finally. The best Connery era Bond song. Cam, take us away.
Goldfinger, Shirley Bassey. To me, this is the one that just carves into stone what a Bond song is and still holds up beautifully. Actually, the Propeller Heads remix of it is incredible. I listen to it all the time. This one, it never gets old. Like, I did consider, like, Thunderball by Tom Jones, but I really was like, is that one I like to throw on a lot? Not so much. And that's my case for a lot of the Connerys, where it's like, a lot of them I respect, but I don't necessarily like listening to them over and over. Whereas the Goldfinger theme still holds up.
the Tom Jones one, you always pass out at the end because you try and do the line and just
Yeah.
yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
Let's go with Llewella next. What do you have for best Connery era Bond song?
Goldfinger came second, but Diamonds came first. Only because it's Shirley Bassey, but she's at her most naughtiest and playful, and I love it.
When you get the what some of the lines mean, it gets very naughty.
I love it. It's great.
I think this podcast is turning into more of an expose of Llewella. I'm finding out so many things about her.
Great.
Her costume choices, leather, one piece. Now this. I like this.
Thank you.
Well, let's jump on that. David, why don't you jump in? What's your favorite of the Connery era?
He always walks while others run. It's got to be Thunderball for me.
Wow.
I mean, he strikes like Thunderball. It's just so, to me, if I thought of any song, and by the way, this is all the Bond songs across all of them, I think that is the standout of my favorite, just because it encapsulates a description of Bond in so many ways. Plus, it gets my blood pumping. It's my ringtone. Like when someone calls
No
me,
way.
it's the Thunderball theme. I can't get enough of it.
Wow. Okay. So your number one Bond song all time is Thunderball. That's great.
Across the board.
That's great. I mean, it's Tom Jones.
Can't go wrong, right?
Can't go wrong.
Nobody's
going
going to call me crazy.
Sir Tom Jones.
It ain't unusual to pick that one.
Oh, you sir. Well, I'm going to give us a consensus. A little tip of the hat to Cameron there. For me, I almost had Goldfinger. I think that's like one of the best Bond songs, but I think she added one mark onto that when she sung Diamonds Are Forever. I'm not going to say Moonraker improved on anything, but good golly, is Diamonds Are Forever one of the best Bond songs of all time? It might be my number one. Combating with David there, I think it's just...
It is amazing.
Well, it is amazing. It's one of the only ones that gets radio play still, at least here in the UK. I hear Diamonds from time to time. There's a couple of other ones. I think Duran Duran and Aha get some play here, and Skyfall.
Live and Let Die, probably.
Not so much.
Scott,
Okay.
Scott, were you at the Sound of 007, right? The concert?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When she sang Diamonds, I'm telling you, I think I saw grown people crying.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say that I shed a tear, but I'm not going to say I didn't shed a tear. It was emotional. That's an amazing song.
Yeah, the Royal Albert Hall was captivated in that moment when she sung those two songs together, and I think I can understand why Goldfinger would be a lot of people's choices, and I imagine a lot of people listening would go for Goldfinger, but I don't think anyone would blame us for also going for Diamonds.
Right.
And also, it's great that a male-led song was in this list too as the best Connery era songs, because I think, a lot of the Bond songs are driven by female singers. I think some of the stronger ones can be from men too. But I think for me, and I'm glad I have consensus, that it is Diamonds Are Forever being the victor here. But for a victor, we must have a loser, the worst Bond song.
Come on, we're going to have consensus on this, right? We have to.
It has to be. It has to be. Cam?
Never say never. Like that one. The Lanny Hall song for Never Say Never Again is just dire. I mean, you can say what you will about any lesser Bond song. They at least kind of sound like Bond songs. There's nothing about this that sounds even like it is appropriate for a Bond movie to me.
Or they're catchy, or they're entertaining in some way, shape, or form. Even some of the ones people
Yeah,
don't like. I remember when we had you on the show, David, for Quantum of Solace. You really don't like that song.
I don't.
But would you say it's worse than Never Say Never Again?
No.
No.
Anal surgery is worse. Or no, is better
Oof.
than Never Say Never Again. I mean,
Ooh-ho.
yeah, I mean, I'm jumping the line here, but I just, when I hear that, I grimace, I cringe, I'm embarrassed. It does sound like bad 70s, not even good, but bad 70s porn music. And because of that, yeah, it's really hard to keep it within even this realm. So you wouldn't believe how fast I wrote this one down. I'm sure you all did. Well, maybe.
Yeah.
Not. Maybe not.
Well, I'll throw mine in. Absolutely Never Say Never Again. There's no way I can defend that in any way, shape, or form. Llewella, can you make it a 4?
I think we've made it consensus because as
Boom.
much as I
Yes.
really want to like this song, it is Never Say Never Again. You know, I'm not saying it's the weakest one. I've heard worse, Dirge recently in a Bond film, but
Mm.
out of the Connery films, this one is the worst.
Name names. Which one's worse recently?
Well, anyone that sounds, you know, I mean, I think, was it Cam? You said it's kind of or sorry if it was Scott, it's kind of singable to, it's memorable. Like,
Mm.
you go, never, never say never again. Whereas, like, you know, how much you sing along to Sam Smith's tune or Billie Eilish's tune, does it really make you want to sing and hum along to the tune? Even Adele,
True.
you go Skyfall, and then that's it. That's the bit you kind of hum along to, and that's it. You know, where we need more bassy. That's what we need on a Bond theme tune. We need more bassy back here. We've all agreed on that, even if it's between Thunderball or, you know, Diamonds. But this is not Thunderball, sorry. But you know, Goldfinger or Diamonds. We need more bombastic bassy. That's what we need.
I got a fever, and the only cure is more bassy.
I'm here for Llewella's hot takes. This is the takeaway from this is Llewella's hot takes
This
is
is
the
it.
best.
Yeah.
This is it. Well, I think Never Say Never Again is walking away with this one. I don't think it was ever really in doubt. If you do have a different choice, though, I'd be interested to hear your argument against it. I want to hear the defenders of this song. The Larney Hall heads, where are you at? Last category before we start to wrap us up, and this was one that I didn't think of originally, but having two sartorially inclined, sartorially interested, trained guests, I think this is a really great choice and a really great question to end on, because we talk about the look, the style, Connery's sexiness. Let's look at the best and worst Connery outfit from his time as 007. And because you two thought of this, why don't you lead us off? Llewella, take us away as the first for best Connery outfit.
So it's Connery outfit, right?
Yeah.
Not any.
Let's stick to Connery for this one.
Okay. I'm going to be really, I mean, I suppose boring, but classic. I'm going to go with his entrance in Doctor No, because without that, without how he's introduced, without his midnight blue dinner suit, we would not have every other Bond since ever.
Mm.
And the way the camera captures it, the way he performs with Eunice Gayson is just amazing. I did write down about 7 different outfits, but yeah, that one I've got to go with because, you know, if you don't have that, you don't have Bond, do you? So I'm going to be boring, but I'm going to go with that one.
I think you might call it boring. Many will probably be calling it classic, so I wouldn't worry about that. I'm going to make a sartorial sandwich, so I'm going to come back to David at the end. Cam and I are the unintelligible, delicious middle.
We're wearing potato sacks here.
Ugh, that's all I own.
Yeah.
I am going for the white dinner jacket from Goldfinger. I think that's a very classic look. I loved that dinner jacket. I'm trying to get one similar myself as my next dinner jacket. I haven't got a classic midnight blue one. I've only got a mustard yellow one currently. So I think I'm going to go for odd colors and just go for white next because why not? I just think it's a great look. And that's the image of Connery I always have in my head is that dinner jacket. That's the solid look for me.
Can you promise me, Scott, that you'll have a red carnation to put in your buttonhole, please?
For you, I will. For you, Llewella, I will.
Thank you.
Cam, fill in the sandwich.
I am with you. I picked the white tuxedo from Goldfinger as well.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I almost went with the one Llewella went with, which is, the dark blue outfit from Dr. No with that intro. But I really just thought about it. If you just say Sean Connery Bond, what do you picture? And I think it is that white suit from Goldfinger. I think there's something that's very Connery specific about that outfit, whereas a lot of, say, like the midnight blue or the darker or like the black suits or something, we've seen a lot of Bonds wear that kind of look. The white tux feels so Connery that I went with that one.
Okay. Looks like we may have a lead here, but David, finish us off on the best. What do you have?
So actually, almost every other Bond did wear a white or ivory dinner jacket. But that being said, Llewella and I, as the bread in the sandwich, agree with each other. It is the Anthony Sinclair suppressed waist, midnight blue, beautiful tuxedo dinner suit that he wears at the beginning of Dr. No. And I'll tell you why, and it's not just the look of it, because it's absolutely amazing. It is the way he moves in it. It's the first time you really see him move and sashay and nod to women and, be that effortless charm where the suit is a part of him, not the other way around. In fact, I will tell you, and kind of put a fine point on this, I loved it so much, I wound up getting a bespoke version from Anthony Sinclair, the people that have the same things.
Wow.
And I wore it last year for the O2 Arena, the Cue the Music thing, because again, that was it. And I used to wear all the time the Skyfall one. Skyfall used to be my jam as far as that tuxedo. But classic is classic. That will never die.
It's not boring. It's classic. Perfect. I think you were quite rightly the bread in that one, and I think it's an excellent choice. I think me and Cam will tip to your expertise and give that to the dark blue.
Thank you. I do want a special mention for, as David mentioned earlier, the Prince of Wales tracksuit, because that is particularly beautiful as well. But yes, special mention to that one.
Well, let's leave it off on a lighter note. The worst outfit, which I think we'll still stick with Connery though with this one, from the Connery era. Llewella, take us away.
Well, apparently I now do hot bites for you. I'm sorry, it's got to be the toweling romper suit from Goldfinger. It's the worst outfit of
bold.
All right, guess who's not getting a Christmas card this year?
See, shocking horror, but yeah, but they're also selling it for £395. I mean, who buys that?
No, it's £630.
Yeah, again.
You gave a discount price.
I mean, Connery, by the way, has the physique to carry it off, but why? Why that toweling romper suit? There's no kind of reason. I did think about the dungarees, by the way, in Never Say Never Again, but then there's a context to the dungarees that there isn't with the toweling romper suit thing.
I think coming to the defense of the romper suit is I think Connery somehow makes it still look good.
Yeah.
But he's the only one.
Oh, yeah. Keck Linder couldn't have pulled that off.
Yeah. You know who liked it? Dink liked it, okay? Dink. Let's not forget Dink.
Did she like it? She was busy being slapped on the bum. Did she like it, or did she just not notice?
Some people like to be slapped on the bum.
Well, I'm sure she did, but my point is I'm not sure she was admiring the romper suit while she was,
What you didn't see is after that, she called the HR department, the human resource department, and that was it.
Yeah. Theadmonishment
everywhere.
Let's get into the filling. Cam, what do you have for worst?
I had the dungarees from Never Say Never Again. There's some looks that Bond should never be seen in. This is the worst. Like, I can look at him going undercover in various disguises through the movies. None of them really jump out as that particularly egregious to me. But there's something about these dungarees where I'm just like, I am watching like just an 80s nightmare right now. And I like my Bond to be kind of classic and timeless a little bit, like in terms of its look. And this is 1983 with a bullet.
Yeah, I can't disagree. I went with the dungarees myself, and there's a story I'll quickly tell because we're at the end of this bit.
Oh, yeah.
Me and Cam were in Vegas a couple of years ago, and we saw a pair of dungarees in H&M, and Cam dared me to put them on in the changing room and take a picture and send it to Cam. Cam has that photo, and I have that photo. And if there's enough interest, the internet might have that photo. But it really is... then you'll have to decide who wore it better, Scott or Sean Connery. I think it's probably Sean Connery. But let's go to the second half. David, what do you have for worst?
Yeah, and I went through a slew of these. The short pink tie, Cam, that was there. I went through Connery's ninja outfit, which looks like it was just whipped cream melting in the sun. His Shrublands outfit from the 1983 Never Say Never Again, but I actually went with the overalls, which you're all calling dungarees, that he wears in Never Say Never Again. Just bad.
It's just
It doesn't say Bond.
No. It's like Burt Reynolds or something.
I think denim never does Bond well, or Bond never does denim well. It's the same with Roger, isn't it?
You didn't like it in Quantum of Solace when he wore denim? No?
It's another Llewella hot take coming in on denim now. But there you go.
Bond don't do denim.
That's it.
There you go.
That's the soundbite. That's it. Dungarees, easily the worst. Easily the worst. But that wraps us up on the best and the worst of the Connery era. Let us know if you have any different takes. We would like to hear from you. So I'm going to wrap us up with, we're going to rank the films very quickly at the end, but there's a final question that sort of looms large over Sean Connery's time as James Bond, and that is, what is the legacy he is leaving and he has left on Bond? What's been his imprint, and sort of looking back on that? Let's start with Cam. Why don't you sort of lead the discussion on that one? What do you think is Sean Connery's legacy?
Well, I think ultimately his legacy is, no matter whoever plays Bond in the future, will be still measured against Sean Connery, and they will still be going back to that original source code to try to get a grasp on who Bond is. He has defined what cinematic Bond is. You have the Ian Fleming novels, but when it comes to a visual representation of that character, they're going back to Connery.
I think, and that sort of ties us very well into sort of the discussions we had at the start. And one thing, I'll throw mine in, I think, a little bit here. It's interesting that we haven't really brought up some of the more controversial sides of Connery's time as James Bond. And I don't want to get bogged down in that, because it could open up the discussion for another hour. Some of the choices they make in some of the Connery films have aged poorly. And I don't think you can sort of not talk about it. But one thing I think is important and about his legacy is that I hope in time, I said earlier that hopefully when we're celebrating 120 years of Bond, people will still be remembering his films for the good they've done and overlooking some of the poor choices. And I genuinely think that the strength of his films will allow that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I think despite some of the bad choices, and they were era choices, they were in the 60s, it was the writing, not necessarily Sean's choice. I think that the strength of his films will be stronger than those moments in his films. And I think the fact that none of these things have come up in our discussion so far is testament to that point, that we haven't felt the need to acknowledge some of those choices. I mean, Pussy Galore. I mean, some of the choices in You Only Live Twice, the beginning of Thunderball.
Yep.
And I'm glad that the strength of his films has allowed us to talk about some of the highlights and even the lowlights without mentioning this stuff. And I think that, and I hope that is his legacy going forward, as well as what Cam said there, that his films are so strong, his contribution so powerful, that we are able to overlook the indiscretions, the silly choices that those films made. And I hope that continues going forward. But I'll open it up to David or Llewella, whoever wants to go next.
So good. I mean, I love what you both said. It's interesting, too, about the great movie aspect. Because of Connery's Bond, we have From Russia with Love, which I've told people, including my own family, that is a great movie. Mm-hmm. It's not just a great Bond movie. It's a great movie. I would put that in the top movies of all time and recommend it as such. But I'll add something a little bit incremental to what you guys have said. Because of Connery's Bond and the success of his Bond in those movies, it has given us a Bond community. It's given us a group of people that are bonded by one character, but we are integrated by our differences. I mean, we have so many, this podcast is a perfect example. We have so many differences and opinions, and they're all wonderful because they make up this bouillabaisse, this cornucopia of this Bond community that is so unique and different. It's not about gender or politics or anything, or, what happened in the past or what's happening in the future. It's more about our passion that, again, is myopic in nature, but it's as big as this world. And that's kind of how Bond is. So I love that his legacy has proven that.
Well said.
Beautiful. And you're right. Without his contribution to film, this podcast wouldn't exist. I think what a lot of us are doing wouldn't be happening. No one would be listening to this because it wouldn't happen in the first place. That's a contribution in and of itself. And Llewella, I think you are a beautiful person to end this legacy chat here. What do you think is Sean Connery's legacy with Bond?
I agree with everything you said, and I think ultimately all roads lead back to Connery's Bond and the films that were made in the 60s. And, I take on board what people have said about, perhaps there's maybe problematic things about these films. But two things I think need to be remembered, and that is that the Bond films from their very beginning have always been an exemplar of British Labour talent. They are British films, and they have always celebrated, British production talent, whether that be the editor or the costume designer or, extras, etc., etc. And also something else that needs to be remembered is a lot of production personnel were really treated really well on these films in a way they weren't treated so well on other films. They got to go to all the best, stay in all the best hotels and have the nicest food, and you didn't have a kind of, certainly when Connery was employed, there wasn't a kind of element of, oh, there's a massive star and you can't talk to him. In research I've done with wardrobe masters and mistresses, they could always have a joke and a laugh with Connery on set. There was no kind of pretension going on. Everyone was kind of one big massive cast and crew. And I think when everyone's kind of maybe complaining about these films, they forget about that element of film production that I think is really important. But as I say, going back to what I said originally and everyone else has said, and I absolutely love what David said about From Russia with Love being a fantastic film, which is why I wrote about it for the BFI Film Classics, because as a film, it stands alone from the Bond films. It is a Bond film, but it's also an absolutely amazing film in its own right. And I'd always recommend, if no one ever wants to see a Bond film in their life, but go and watch From Russia with Love, because it doesn't matter whether you're a Bond fan or not, you will love that film. But yeah, all roads lead back to Connery. Like every time you get a new Bond cast, they're always analysed, aren't they, from film critics in relation to Connery's Bond. It doesn't matter who they are, they will always get, remember, he will always be remembered for that. So yeah, it's great. And it's fun.
All roads lead back to Connery. I can't think of a better way of wrapping that up. We're just going to throw in our rankings of his films, and then we'll be signing off from our guests. Why don't we go to Mr. Zaritsky first? Your rankings let's go from best to worst.
Best to worst. Okay.
Best to worst of the Connery films.
Right. So, number one, this is Casey Kasem coming in at number one. We have Thunderball.
Ooh.
Thunderball is my number one Connery film. I see a lot of oohs going on. My number two is Dr. No. And a lot of that has to do with my love for Jamaica. From Russia with Love, because it's outstanding. Absolutely amazing film. Speaks for itself. Goldfinger is next. Then we've got Diamonds Are Forever. And then finishing way last, Never Say Never Again.
What about You Only Live Twice?
Oh, it was right after Goldfinger. Sorry. Did I skip that? I did. From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, You Only Live Twice, Diamonds Are Forever, Never Say Never Again.
Okay.
I'm so glad I messed up the first ranking. Everything else is going to be nice and clean now.
It's so easy now. Cam, what about yours?
My number one is Goldfinger. My number two is Dr. No, which kind of surprised me when I was doing my rankings, because Dr. No was one that later in life has really risen up for me. Whereas if you were to ask, 16-year-old Cam, where do you rank Dr. No? It would have been near the bottom. So it is now my number two. Number three, From Russia with Love. Number four, Thunderball, because I love a vacation with Bond, especially when there's sharks. Number five, Diamonds Are Forever. This is such an affectionate choice for me. It's a movie that I go back to sometimes more than almost any other Connery movie, because I love the silliness of it. And every year before we're going to go to Vegas, Scott, I watch Diamonds Are Forever. And then you have a significant gap.
Oh.
And, in there, I'm throwing in, like Spectres and things like that, the ones that I'm not as big a fan of. And then I get to You Only Live Twice. And then lastly, Never Say Never Again.
I'm so hurt inside.
Can I ask what you don't like about You Only Live Twice?
I find that one just, to me, completely loses me about halfway through. The pace just falls apart. Connery, it's not my favorite performance of his. And there's just something about, I like the, little Nelly action sequence, but I find a lot of the action in it just a little lethargic. There's nothing about it that pops for me the way that some of the other ones do.
Yeah, fair. Thank you.
Well, I'll throw some spanners in the works and give somewhat of a controversial list, I'm sure, to some listening, but I'm sticking to it. I went with number one, and this is with a bullet, From Russia with Love. It's my favorite Connery film. I think we said it before, it stands head and shoulders above the rest as a good film. It transcends the Bond genre. There aren't many. I think Casino Royale is probably there with it. That just go into the realm of being a good film. You could just show anyone. They don't need to have all this sort of built-in knowledge about James Bond. You can just watch it as a piece. And as a spy film, we talk about spy films every week. It's probably the best spy movie of the entire run of James Bond films.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's important to me personally. So that's why that's there. Second of all, it goes to Goldfinger. I think I just have a lot of fun with this film. It's just a fun ride. I'm a big defender of my third option, which is You Only Live Twice. I have a lot of fun with it. I love hanging out in Japan. I love Little Nelly. I love the volcano sequence, as I said earlier. I think it's great. Dr. No at number 4. You can't beat the original, and I think he's such a confident start. Number 5 is Never Say Never Again.
Oh,
This is where the hate mail comes in. I
never,
don't mind
Scott.
it.
Never.
Never say never
Who
again.
hurt you, Scott? Show me on the puppet where they hurt you,
Yeah.
please.
Where do I start with that? Number 6, Thunderball. I just can never match Thunderball's vibe. It's just never worked for me. There's bits I love about it. I love Fiona Volpe. I just I don't like hanging out. I don't like the laid back vibe. I like a bit of adrenaline. And Thunderball, it seems lacking in that. For me, personally, I think, and I've seen it on the big screen. I've heard the people say you have to see it on the big screen. Didn't do it for me. But that's just me personally. That's just my take. And lastly, I think I've said this already, but Diamonds Are Forever in last place. I just, I think it's such a waste of my favorite city in the world. I love Las Vegas, and I hate to see what they do to my baby. And I love Diamonds Are Forever, the book, as well. And I don't like what they do to that either. I think it's one of the better Flemings. And yeah, it's a shame. But let's end with Llewella. What do you have for us?
Before I go into my ranking, Scott, I'd love to know what you think of Spy, because that is completely different from the novel.
I haven't actually got to that one yet. I've just finished Goldfinger.
I will listen into your Roger Moore retrospective, because if you don't like Spy if you like Spy for being the film it is, you will not like the novel, or vice versa, because it's completely different.
Okay.
Yeah.
True.
So anyway, back to it. So I'm going to agree with you, Scott. Number 1 has to be From Russia with Love. It's absolutely brilliant on different levels. Number 2 for me is Goldfinger, and the reason I choose that is because by Goldfinger they've decided on the kind of formula, but the formula really works in that film in a way that it doesn't with later films necessarily. Ironically, given that From Russia with Love is my favourite one and number 1. But anyway, number 3 is Dr. No, because without Dr. No you wouldn't have the rest of them. Number 4 is Thunderball. Number 5 is Diamonds Are Forever, which is my favourite Bond film, but in Connery's ranking I'll put it there. But what I love about Diamonds, absolutely love, is just it's laugh a minute.
Yeah.
You can have fun with Diamonds. And then, sorry, Scott. Number 6 is You Only Live Twice, which no one will agree with me on. But I just find it a very cold film. I think Cam said
the same, yeah.
Yeah, I don't like the script. I think it's very boring, and I think Connery's tired, and I think there's all sorts of stuff going on with it, but it's just not interesting. I'm also not convinced that he would really go off with Kissy Suzuki at the end of that film. I know it's a novel, but yeah, really. And anyway, but I'm really sorry to put it last, because actually I don't think it's as bad as people make out, but Never Say Never Again.
It's okay. I think
the reason that I honestly think with that film that if Connery wasn't in it, who would watch it?
I think that's fair.
That's true.
Yeah.
I mean, I like it, but the reason it does well at the box office is because Connery's in it, so they can kind of market it as Connery's back.
I think it is, though, almost like Thunderball did this to the Bahamas. You Only Live Twice did something to Japan where it's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, it does capture. It's like a triptych. The way it kind of washes over the landscapes, it does capture the beauty of it pretty well.
I'll never forget the rooftop shot from the helicopter of these fighting people. It's one of my favorite Bond shots.
Love it.
And that'll always stick with me. And there's no need to apologize, because people will be listening to this, and I'm sure all 4 of our lists, there'll be people going, that's my list too. Except maybe mine. But for you 3, there'll be people in agreement. And that's what I love, is we all have our takes on it. And there'll be things that listening to you, people at home might not have agreed with we've said here, and that's fine, because we all take something different from Bond, from film, and that's the beauty of it, because we can all watch the same hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and get a completely different experience, and we can go back and watch it again and get a second different experience. But let's bring it home. It's been a gargantuan discussion. I want to thank the wonderful guests, David and Llewella. You've both been absolute stars. We've put this together. This has been in the works for a while, and I just want to thank you both for your time that you spent with us this evening and with everyone listening. I'm sure all of us listening have had a good time with it, but thank you both for coming on the show. It's a pleasure to see you both again. I'll throw it to you. David first. If people want to hear more from you, there'll be links in the show notes below, but where can they find you online?
They can find me on my YouTube channel, The Bond Experience. It's also on Instagram as well. Different content, different places. If you dislike yourself, you could even go on Facebook. It's a tough place there. And no, I'm just, the next place you could probably see me is Llewella and I are going to be hosting a costume party. And we can't, no, we're not, but we should.
Blue rompers.
I'm thinking after this, we should get together and host a costume party.
And dungarees.
Yeah.
We'll wear the overalls. Yeah, the dungarees. No problem.
I'll wear the Italian romper suit if you wear the dungarees.
Done. I'll even burn my onesie for that.
I want to go to that party.
That'll be a good party.
I think we'll sell tickets to it. That's it. All for charity. Let's do it. Dungarees all around, folks. David, it's been a pleasure. And Llewella, where can people hear more from you and find your books online?
If they want to, they're very welcome to follow me on Twitter. It's at Llewella Chapman. It's all one word. And as David said, if they're brave enough to go on Facebook, they can find me on there. Books available on Amazon or whatever. But I wouldn't waste your money on those. Just hang out and have a chat, and that would be lovely. So, but I also want to thank you, Scott, and you, Cam, for inviting us on, because we're all a little bit mad in the Bond fandom, but I think we all get on and make friends, don't we? So it's always lovely to have a chat and enjoy our time. So thank you.
Oh, no, thank you so much. And you know what? Sean Connery may be gone, but he still brings people together.
Romper suit or non-romper suit?
That tears us apart. Romper suits. Yeah.
Well, David, Llewella, thank you both. 3 different time zones. We brought it together. What a chat. Celebrating Sean Connery. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
We've been celebrating the Sean Connery era here on Spyhards for the last 4 years. We've done deep dives on all of his 7 films. And along the way, we've had some fantastic guests to share their thoughts about those films. But we decided to add to the celebration. We're going to get a bunch of them back.
That's right. We have 3 experts back to talk about what the Connery era means to them and to rank the movies how they see fit. So, returning to the fold to talk Connery, we have Calvin Dyson, Mark O'Connell, and Phil Nobile Jr.
I can't think of a better bunch of Bond luminaries than these 4, so let's get to it, Cam. Roll the tape.
And now, listeners, a real treat. We are joined in the Fort Knox vault by James Bond YouTube commentator extraordinaire, Calvin Dyson. And now, Calvin, I guess it's kind of an obvious question, but what did the Sean Connery era mean to the James Bond franchise?
Oof, gosh. Yeah, everything. It's the foundation that it's all built on, isn't it? So it's so hugely important. If any of those 5 first films had failed, that could well have meant the end of it. And then particularly for him coming back for Diamonds Are Forever after, the Lazenby one, obviously it made money. But perhaps, the enthusiasm might not have been there had he not sort of resurrected it again. So it's, I think it means everything as the foundation for what's still going to this day.
Is there anything about the era that jumps out to you when you think of, favorites or things that really just jump to the forefront when you now examine the Bond franchise 50 years plus later?
Oh, as in films or elements or
anything you'd like, anything that really just jumps out to you.
Okay. Well, the first thing that jumped out for me, I suppose, because I'm perhaps a bit of a an outlier in the Bond fandom in this respect, because the Connery era isn't one of my favorites necessarily. Goldfinger and You Only Live Twice, though, are two of my very top tier Bond films, and I think it was really important to introduce that extravagance into the series and really play with that. So yeah, those ones kind of stick out to me as highlights. Yeah.
Well, now you've kind of introduced a question. Now I'd like to know, you're saying the Connery era isn't, your favorite, and we are wrapping up the Connery era, and the idea of someone who says, hey, this isn't my all-time favorite era is actually fascinating to include in a wrap-up. What is it about that era that maybe doesn't bring it up to the top level for you?
Well, I think, I'm sure that a good deal of this is to do with nostalgia as well. I'm very much a Pierce Brosnan, Roger Moore fanboy over Sean Connery. So, I would take most of their films, actually, over a good deal of Connery's. I think that some of the earlier ones, for my tastes, Dr. No from Russia with Love, they're a little rough around the edges. And I think Goldfinger is a much more polished product, and a much more professional feeling product, I guess. Whereas Dr. No, I mean, it might well just be that I don't gel with Terence Young's style, because it's his films that are the ones where I've kind of have never really done it all that much for me. From Russia with Love in particular, I feel like it borrows a bit too much from things like North by Northwest, and Hitchcock, and I don't feel like it can stand on it so that much for me personally. And I know that's a heathen thing to say. From Russia with Love is one of the highest rated films in the series. But yeah, I guess it comes down to the fact that I don't think the pilot episode of any TV show is the best. I don't know if the first few episodes of any series are the best. People are still finding their groove, they're still finding their style, and I think Bond hits that by Goldfinger. So I prefer that one to the others, I guess.
And so you're saying Goldfinger is kind of the gold standard, pardon the pun. Do you have like a ranking of the Connery era?
Ooh, yes. It would be Goldfinger, You Only Live Twice. Oh, God help me. Diamonds Are Forever.
Oh, wow.
From
Nice.
Russia with Love, Dr. No, Thunderball. I'm going to get angry messages about this. Oh, dear.
Maybe one of them will be from me, because I'm a big Dr. No and Thunderball guy. So.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, you can throw me off.
Well, Calvin, thanks so much for coming on just to wrap up the Connery era today.
Oh, no, I appreciate it. Thank you.
And re-emerging from the cool Bahamian waters, it is our friend, Mr. Mark O'Connell, writer, author, Bond fan extraordinaire. He's written books like Watching Skies, about Star Wars, Spielberg and Us, and of course Catching Bullets, Memoirs of a Bond Fan. It's great to have you back, Mark. How are you?
I'm good. I'm glad to be back at the debating table we got very obsessed by what does Vargas do, and I'm still have that phrase and all of that in my head from when we chatted Thunderball.
Well, it's so popular it spawned a t-shirt line that got shut down by Eon. So who can ask for more?
Oh really? Okay. I did use that t-shirt to redecorate my Bond room, or partly. So so that's sort of full circle.
They're limited edition now, that's all I'll say. If you've got
Yes.
one, you're in a club.
Yeah.
And Eon are hunting you down. But speaking of Eon and speaking of Bond, we spoke about Thunderball a couple of years ago now on the show. And we should get you back on for a full episode. It's been a while. But
Yeah, totally.
we're celebrating Sean Connery now, the Sean Connery era of Bond. And we're having all of the guests back to ask a couple of questions to them. And the first one I think is sort of most important, because it's sort of what leads us in, is what is your earliest memory of the Connery Bond?
My first memory of Connery is actually perhaps a bit different to other people's. It's not actually involving Bond films as such, but when my grandfather worked on the Bond films, as he was a driver to Eon and Cubby and the family there, what I remember, there was always a story as a kid. So I would hear the name Sean and Connery, over sort of family Christmas dinner tables and, in the garden in the summer. And my grandfather was driving Connery back, I presume from Pinewood, back into London, and Connery wanted fish and chips. and my grandfather, and it must have been possibly around the time of Goldfinger and Thunderball, because the Bond mania fever had really, really grown by then.
Mhm.
And my grandfather said, right, I'll pull into this chippy on the Old Kent Road. And Connery nearly got out. And I remember my grandfather had to say, no, I'll go in and get it. What do you want? Cotton chips, ketchup, salt, vinegar. And I just love that image of Sean Connery kind of waiting outside like a kid whilst my granddad went and got a bag of chips, presumably wrapped up in that week's Daily Express. So that's my first memory of Connery, just hearing his name. It was that one was a bit of a sort of family myth story that would get sort of repeated ad nauseum. But in terms of Bond viewing and Bond cinema, and I did actually just sort of check up on this, my first Bond film memory of Connery dates back to Monday, the 31st of March, 1986, when I was 11 years old. And I think it was an Easter Monday, and ITV was showing from Russia with Love. And it was the first time I'd ever seen a Connery Bond film. At that point, I was very Team Roger. I'd seen Octopussy at the cinema age 7. Yeah, imagine anyone seeing a Bond film age 7 now at the cinema. And then I saw View to Kill age 9. And so I was very Roger Moore, and then obviously seeing Moonraker at Christmas on TV. And Connery was like my step Bond. He was like the second one I got into. So, you know, Roger was, and he still is, he's like the one I saw as I sort of emerged and the flared colossus that is Roger was there before me. But so I had to sort of rethread it. And, you know, Connery was, for me at my age, you know, as a sort of 80s, 90s kid, Connery was often our parents' Bond. So he was like the black and white Bond. He was like finding old vinyl that you weren't really sure you'd get into, because I had cassettes and they were Roger Moore, to sort of make a strange metaphor. But then as I got a little older, I learned that the scratches on that Connery vinyl, you know, the back projections, the 60s-ness, were kind of their glories and their charm. So yeah, it was From Russia with Love, Bank Holiday Monday, March 86. And whilst it perhaps wasn't the most energetic, sort of vibrant film for a burgeoning Bond fan kid, I do remember being really excited about it. Although for years I missed the opening pre-title sequence because I was faffing around and couldn't get my video recorder to work. So for years I never saw the opening titles of From Russia with Love. They were always a bit of a mystery. And who knew Connery was actually in it, playing the first returning actor to come back to a Bond film, playing another role.
Yeah,
in the opening of From Russia with Love.
Very true.
So long story short, that was my sort of Sean Connery cherry bursting moment.
I always tip my hat to you, and it's one thing that jumped out to me when I was reading your book, Catching Bullets, Memoirs of a Bond Fan, was the fact that you have all these dates in your head. I'm terrible with dates, but you remember to the bank holiday because that's when you saw it. And speaking of, bank holidays and Bond are so connected and so impactful on a lot of people's viewing of Bond, not just with Connery, but with Bond throughout time, because that's where a lot of British people, shall we say, discovered Bond. It wasn't at the cinema, it was on ITV or whatever channel it was playing.
Yeah, and they would be on very rarely. I think Goldfinger was first on in the early 70s, or sorry, Dr. No was, and they would take 5, 6, 7 years before they would be broadcast. They would then be on, like I say, like a sort of Boxing Day or Christmas Day afternoon. They would be a special event. And now sort of ITV2 plays The World Is Not Enough 5 times a day, and it's kind of slightly lost its sheen there. But yeah, it was a big event. I mean, I think that the nearest for sort of American listeners would be the ABC Sunday Night Movie. And again, this was slightly before we had video machines and players. And then when we did, I got ours sort of 84, 85, I think. You recording the Bond films was not only very stressful, but it was also bloody amazing, because you would have a copy of a new Bond film, and then if you had Easter 1986, I remember Diamonds Are Forever was on perhaps one of the May bank holidays, and also Live and Let Die as well. So suddenly you're getting like I always say, just imagine a new Bond film coming out every 5 weeks, beamed into your home. I mean, who knows what might happen in the Amazon Bond future? That could all happen again. But it was a brilliant time, and I can't sort of stress how exciting it was just to see what trailer ITV would throw at the end of a broadcast, touting, from Goldfinger or From Russia with Love is going to be on a week Sunday at 7:15 only on LWT.
LWT, that takes me back, and it's almost unimaginable now. Once every 5 weeks in the world we're living in now. But talking about Connery and sort of his impact is one thing we're really focusing on in this episode. And I want to hear from you because you've got Bond in your family blood. It goes back to your grandfather. What does the Connery era mean to you?
Well, it's where Bond was forged. It's where I would suggest that action cinema was forged. Connery and that DNA of Broccoli, John Barry, Ken Adam, Harry Saltzman, what David Pickett, United Artists, facilitated for them all, what Pinewood did, what that new sense of early 60s, new era, the post-war times, post-war movies were perhaps moving away. What Connery represented was just literally the personification of the word new or fresh. And I do think that he not only helped forge the character and create the character and literally hit, the phrase is hit the ground running with that panther-like gait. He also created the commerce for Bond. He was a major global movie star within a film or two. I often say that I think perhaps Roger Moore, who came later, he navigated, and I think we have, it's a strange parallel here, but I think Connery created the commerce for Bond and the fever for Bond, but Roger Moore navigated it better. And whilst we're not maybe talking about Roger here, it was Connery that set that up. His films, perhaps tonally, thematically, structurally, a little more similar beat for beat than perhaps the Roger films had a little more range because perhaps they had a bit more time to stretch, and they also, the Connery films were very specifically Bond films. But when the time we get to the Roger Moore era, those Bond films have to slightly reflect other movies going on. Connery did do it. There, the first couple or so Connery films do reflect that North by Northwest, Hitchcock, that, as I say, that post-war hero backdrop and tapestry. But what Connery represents style to me and precision. The Connery films are tight. They're like granite. They don't buckle. They don't bend. I saw You Only Live Twice on the big screen recently at a John Barry retrospective at London's BFI, and while some of the cultural references and the cultural usages are a little creaky, and we wouldn't do that in that way now, we were all amazed by how slick and how commanding he was.
It's an interesting thing talking about sort of the look of Connery, but also going back to what you said about laying the tracks. And one thing we've spoken about a lot on this episode is the whole idea of the blueprint, or laying the foundations for Bond for all the other actors going forward. And I think people do talk about Connery being the blueprint, Goldfinger being the blueprint, and that maybe is sort of a point that's been said many times and to death. But I like the idea of him laying the tracks as well. Like he's set the course, and people have jumped on that, or if we use the track from it, idea, they're on that train with him. But Connery is the conductor of the train. He started us off on that journey.
Yes. Yeah. No. Very, very much so. I always liken. I mean, I actually think the Bond series and the Bond DNA has quite a few templates. But obviously Goldfinger was the one. I think Goldfinger, I would say, 1964, Connery's third spin of the dice, that is when the films start moving. Dr. No and From Russia with Love are great films. And I actually think Dr. No gets better with age. Well, so does From Russia with Love. But they're very particularly tied to what I would say is a late 1950s Kennedy era jet set world. And that's why they're brilliant. But then along comes Goldfinger, and the whole film starts moving. The titles are moving. Before we had the projections and and Binder's dots, and they're moving. But now we've got revolving projections. Now we've got cutaways. The titles dissolve. The camera, I feel, starts moving more. Ted Moore's camera, and I think it was Ted Moore and Goldfinger, the camera's moving more. It's not just a static sort of late 50s way of doing B-movie action capers. And then physically we have the sets. The sets are moving. Goldfinger's stud meeting room is literally moving. And then the car, it's not just a car that moves on wheels. The parts within it move. The dashboard lifts up. The wheels spin out and put out sort of deadly Ben-Hur gadgets. So that is Connery. Connery makes that work. He is sitting astride, as I say, metaphorically, not physically, but he sat there. He's being held aloft by Ken Adam, John Barry, Shirley Bassey, Cubby and Harry Saltzman, Peter Hunt, the editor, the sense of costume and the usage of costume as well, and even casting directors. It's very clever casting. They would never overcast the Bond films around Connery himself. We would never have, if you think about it, we rarely had big names opposing him for sort of box office or anecdotal reference.
No, they were really sort of his films. And I suppose if we're dialing into the Connery era, one thing I asked you ahead of time to prepare for this question, but is there something you wanted to maybe champion or highlight about the Connery era that really stands out to you, be that sort of villains or the girls or anything like that?
For me, it's definitely the villains, because the villains, that template, or blueprint or whatever we can say, or that genome is there from the get-go, and it links to Fleming as well. But for me, there's two factors that I adore about Connery's era, and which I think are timeless, and not just in a fan way, but they are truly creatively, artistically timeless, and that is the design of those films and the music. Whenever anyone says Connery to me, Bond Connery 60s, obviously with a little 71 post thought, I just think of Ken Adam and those sexy midnight designs, that world. Connery didn't just fill that role, he made us get a sense of time. It was there's a lot of Bond films that, like Diamonds Are Forever, is brilliant because it just forever feels like 1 a.m. where everything's a bit vicey, a bit alcoholic, a bit dangerous, a bit sexy, and that, Connery just inhabits that world brilliantly. So the two factors for me that I always think that personify Connery is the music and that style, the Ken Adam production design, the car. The DB5 is an extension of Bond itself, with the sort of back collar lapel that comes up to protect and hide, and that silvery grey is echoed in the Prince of Wales check suits. It's all there. I mean, it's genius when you look back how that all fell into place in a way that no other, you could say Star Wars did, but very few franchises have that sort of game-changing DNA that changed pop culture as well. I think it didn't just change cinema, action cinema, it changed how the Brits present themselves and how they're seen abroad.
Well, in the episode we were talking about the music and sort of championing the music, and it's good that you brought it up because it's not my final question. I'll throw one extra curveball at you. With our guests, we did talk about best and worst song. So I'll throw you the question. What's the best and the worst song from the Connery era?
Right. Oh gosh. It's like Sophie's Choice. Son or daughter. The first one that came into my head was You Only Live Twice. I think it's a beautiful song. So I would like that. But then Goldfinger, like I say, that's when the music started moving, when the title song started bouncing around and becoming a thing. So maybe, actually, I'll have to say Goldfinger is the best Bond title song, but all of the others come close. The worst, Never Say Never Again. I was listening to it with an American friend recently, and it's like, it feels like it's the opener to a sort of 1980s TV miniseries starring Joan Collins. It's just all a bit, and it shouldn't have been, because it came from great musical DNA.
It did, and there was a great idea as to what that music was going to be, and then they ended up with that track. I mean, there's a massive story behind that. If you want to read about it online, you can go find it, folks. It's interesting that all of us agreed it was also Never Say Never Again. So you're on track with all of us who said that was the worst. And
good.
Speaking of worst, let's talk about ranking the Connery films. We all had our rankings, and we've spoken about your credentials already. So I think people want to hear from you. would you and how would you rank, and in what order would you rank the Connery films?
I'm not a ranker,
Okay.
as it were. I always find that's difficult because as soon as I've done it, I sit and go, no, I should have swapped that one with that
True.
one. But I will. Let's start at the bottom. I do think Never Say Never Again is a bit of a folly of a Nearly Bond film. It's. I mean, it has great memories for me, 83 and all that. Again, that sort of ITV world of special screenings and VHS rentals. But I think it's a real bloated TV movie of a Bond film. You know, it has a weird jazzercise score. It's you can see its budget sort of dripping away at points. It's not shot brilliantly. I mean, despite I think it was Douglas Slocum who is was no amateur when it came to visuals and cinematography, but it just feels like a slightly glossy LWT TV movie, the Saint would push out in the 80s. So I mean, it's got great elements, Barbara Carrera, Max von Sydow, and of course Connery. It was still fun to see Connery return, but
Sure.
it's not my favorite. And then, maybe I'm going to start ranking them now. Thunderball next. Yep, Thunderball. Sorry, I mean it was the one we spoke such brilliant, passionate lengths about originally, but I do like it, but it also kind of spends an hour setting up what the villain's doing, and it's this personification of opening bow doors, cut to opening bow doors, and then someone else saying bow doors open. There's a lot of that going on. Whilst Connery's maybe not as passive as he is in Goldfinger, he's just forever captured and earwigging in Goldfinger, but it still works brilliantly. I don't know why. So Thunderball's just... I sometimes put Thunderball on, and I did recently with a Bond pal who's staying with us over Easter, and we're going, I don't remember that corridor or that window, and it's just one I maybe gravitated to less. As a kid, it was probably because it was just long, and it felt like a whole day when you watched it.
It's true.
So yeah, so maybe that. So right, I've got 2, 4 more. From Rush with Love is a good middle ground for me. Again, it's one of those films that gets better as you get older. But it has a very sort of sedentary espionage, late 50s detective pace to it. That is why it works. But for me, it's perhaps less of a dynamic Bond film. But I'm only saying this because I'm trying to rank them in some sort of order. I think the upshot for me, and we'll sort of look at the top 3 ones. For me, I'll say Goldfinger next.
Sure.
But the final 2 that are my top Connery Bond films, and it's always hard for me to differentiate. And you've obviously, by process of elimination, we're there. But I would say Diamonds Are Forever and You Live Twice, which are not the obvious Connery go-tos, but I think You Live Twice is a beautiful piece of pop art extravagance. I love its sense of internationalism. It's really it was slightly ahead of its time in terms of just depicting Asian worlds and Asian stories and what used to be called the Far East and the Orient. The score is beautiful. The sense of production and the sense of scale is still stunning. I was looking the other day at some black and white aerial photos of the set. I was near Pinewood the other day, and I just wanted to see how big was that set. And I found some photos of the volcano set, and it was like, Jesus, that was a big thing. And
they had to open the roof for it. It was huge.
Yeah. Well, I think they had to build a roof for it,
and you're right.
And it's there on screen. I mean, that's partly down to that film's cinematographer who knew how to shoot that. He shot David Lean epics, and he knew how to shoot wide and big. And maybe just because I'm a bit of a perverse Bond fan as well, I would today. I'm going to say that Diamonds Are Forever is my favorite Connery film. I love how he came back and he kind of set Bond up for the 70s. Yes, it was a Roger Moore Bond film in all but name. But George Lazenby proved the role could be recast. Connery coming back for Diamonds Are Forever proved that the role could be cast again. Even though it was obviously they brought the safe guy back and it worked and it was a big hit and it maintained Bond's uh, hopes and box office hopes and production and studio confidence, it did that enough to then springboard Roger Moore into an era that, and we'll talk about Roger Moore another time, I'm sure. But I love Diamonds Are Forever. It's kinky, it's sadistic, it's sexy. It has two gay lovers who are devoted to each other in a way that no other film franchise has ever done before or since, and I will stand on that hill. The Eternals does not count. I love how Connery came back and he's not breathing in so much, and he doesn't care. And there's a little sense of maturity to him, to Jill St. John, to Charles Gray, and also the script. Whilst it was written by a straight American in his early 30s, and Tom Mankiewicz is also another understated Bond genius. I love Diamonds Are Forever, and I love when other people have problems with it.
It's been an interesting episode for Diamonds Are Forever, so it's nice to see it get its flowers from you. Some might call that list perverse. You use that list perverse, but it's a personal thing. This is all a personal thing, and that's its connection to you, and that's why it's important. And that's why the Connery era is important, because it really does sort of run the gamut of what you can do with a Bond film, I tend to find. Especially when you include Never Say Never Again, which is basically off the rails Bond. Mark, it's been a pleasure having you back on the show. It's great to have your ranking, despite you being a non-ranker. It's great to have twisted it out of you.
No worries. No, thank you for asking. It's been good to go back and think Sean all over again.
Oh, we all often do. But before I let you go, where can people find more from you online and read about your books?
Well, I've got a website. It's a good sort of destination to find, which is markoconnell.co.uk, and Catching Bullets, Memoirs of a Bond fan's out there in some form still. Watching Skies is also there, and watch this space. I'm never far from the Bond cliff face. I'm usually tapping away and finding new stuff to share.
Well, there you go, folks. Mark O'Connell will return, in terms of books at least, as well. That's a little tease for you all. But Mark, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming back on the show.
Not at all. Thank you.
Okay, we are joined by Phil Nobile Jr., the editor-in-chief at Fangoria, who joined us to review Never Say Never Again a while ago, a very polarizing movie that got a lot of great response. But Phil, going back to maybe your earliest memories, what was kind of that first moment you discovered the Connery era?
Gosh, I would have to say probably in America, I discovered the Connery era on television, on the ABC Sunday Night Movie they would show. The Goldfinger and Thunderball and that kind of thing. But I probably don't have a working memory of those films until I got a little bit older and started to rediscover the films. So I didn't I remember having a disagreement with my older brother about whether Connery or Roger Moore was better. And I just had seen more Roger Moore movies at the time. So I thought he was the guy. But my appreciation for Connery came with age, I think.
What age was it about where Connery kind of clicked with you? Because I'm in a similar boat as you.
I'm not sure. It was adulthood for sure.
Yeah.
It was in sort of circling back and revisiting the whole series, where and then maybe reading the books, all the books, is where Connery kind of cemented himself to me as the quote unquote perfect James Bond. Because when I read those books, it's always Connery in my head.
So do you consider Connery your Bond now?
It's hard to say. I don't. I avoid ranking things like this. I don't like ranking movies and that sort of thing. And certainly Daniel Craig brought me back to the franchise in a way that I hadn't been probably since I was a teenager, because it was just such an exciting reinvention in 2006 when it happened. But I think that if you put a gun to my head and made me pick one Bond, it would have to be Connery.
Okay. Now, so saying that, what does the Connery era mean to you now from where you sit at this point in time?
Well, I think just from an anthropological or historical point of view, Connery is the Rosetta Stone of the franchise. You do not have a franchise without Connery. And I think that there's not enough credit given to Connery for the franchise's longevity, because certainly if you look at what Broccoli and Saltzman did in the wake of Connery leaving, in fact, even earlier, the things that they did that caused him to leave, it seems kind of clear that they didn't know what they had. And the fact that after he left, they looked to people like John Gavin and Adam West, and then landed on an untried actor in George Lazenby. All respect to Lazenby for being the first guy to walk through that door and take those bullets. I think it really is clear to me that they didn't understand how much Connery was bringing to the franchise. That they thought he was so replaceable with these sort of oh gosh, I don't want to get in trouble, but folks that certainly weren't on the level that Connery was. I would say, and he, by cementing that role with those 5 movies in a row, and probably he had done it by the second or third, really. I think he's the reason there's a franchise in 2024.
Do you feel like, because you're very active in the Bond community, do you feel like Connery has almost been like kind of diminished over time? Like people have kind of lost that kind of luster he once had, especially post Craig?
Well, I think folks are very pendulous in their favorites. I think in just the time I've been interacting with folks in the Bond community, we've gone from people kind of slagging Brosnan to now there's like a nostalgic affection for Brosnan, which I find interesting. And I think that happens with all of them. I think Roger Moore was kind of, on his passing, I would say, became a lot more venerated and appreciated. And I think it's also has to do with just shifts in popular opinion. I think after Craig, I don't want to say Craig wore out his welcome, but I think after Craig's run ran its course, folks gravitated toward the lighter takes like Moore and Brosnan. And I think Connery is swept up in those tides. It comes and goes. And I think that Craig's maybe debut reminded everybody how vital that role could be. And then that put them in the mind of Connery's first 2 films. And then I think Craig kind of doing some films that weren't all-time classics also reminded folks that no one's infallible, and you get Connery in Diamonds Are Forever, and you get Connery in Never Say Never Again. So I think the pendulum just shifts. It goes back and forth, and you'll see sentiments going one way or the other. So I don't know if Connery's been diminished, but he might be in an ebb cycle at the moment.
I feel though in a weird way that like Dr. No and From Russia with Love have almost gotten a boost post like Craig and during the Craig era, where it's like Goldfinger was always seen as like the big one, right? Like that's where Connery really matters. But I feel like now there's more of an appreciation for kind of the darker, more stripped down spy stuff that back in the day, like when I was discovering Bond films, those were not the popular ones to be watching.
Yeah, if you pick a book off the shelf from the 90s, it's almost dismissive of Dr. No. And I love Dr. No. I think when you look at it, it's clear that they're inventing a new kind of subgenre as they go. And to me, that's exciting. Even though it's not fully formed in that film, the genesis of something very special and powerful is happening right before your eyes. Like there'd never been a British protagonist on screen like you'd seen. Not that he was British, but he presented as British. That you hadn't seen that on screen before. And I think if you kind of like press play on Dr. No and put yourself in that mindset of what was happening in cinemas 1 year, 2 years before that, Dr. No is a revelation. And then From Russia with Love kind of expands on it in a way that things hadn't gotten silly or boring or bored yet. Where I think, whereas you get to Goldfinger, Connery's already got kind of one eye out the door, and he's worked with Hitchcock by then, and he's kind of maybe not feeling this role so much. But his kind of laid back vibe in that film became part of the Bond DNA in a way, even though it was maybe attributable to Connery kind of getting bored of the job by then.
Now, this is kind of a tough question considering, how long the era ran and also just the sheer kind of changes in how the movies came across. The tones jump all over the place. But is there an element of like the Connery era that really jumps out to you, whether it be, villains, the Bond girls, the direction? Is there anything about it that now when you sit and think about it really just makes you really passionate about it?
I'm always drawn to the first couple because again, there's nothing rote, there's no winking self-referential anything happening yet. It's all new. And I love the weird Addams Family collection of villains that is Spectre in From Russia with Love. There's a super villain in Dr. No and there's a super villain in Goldfinger, but the way that there's no one villain in From Russia with Love, but it's this just weird looking kinky enclave of evildoers feels really special because they managed to ride that line without it being ridiculous. but it's a little bit arch and it's a little heightened. And I think that sweet spot has never been found again in the franchise. There's it echoes in like Xenia Onatopp and certain other like memorable hench people and whatnot, but they rode that line perfectly in From Russia with Love. And I wish that the films, as quickly as they cranked them out, they didn't seem to sit in one tone for very long. Goldfinger's very much got its own kind of thing, and Thunderball's another thing again. But as far as Connery's films go, I would have loved maybe one more that had the tone and color palette and spiritual energy of From Russia with Love.
Yeah, that would have been really interesting following up Diamonds Are Forever of all movies. Yeah.
Yeah, Diamonds Are Forever is a weird one because it's a victory lap. He's coming back after having proven that and this is just public opinion. On Her Majesty's is one of my favorite films in the franchise, but the vibe was they proved that they couldn't do it without him, and he came back. So there's a swagger and an apathy almost to his performance in that film that, again, depending on the day, that's the one I hit play on. That's the one I vibe with because it's just got there's no other, think about it like this. There's no other 70s Connery Bond.
Yeah.
That's the one, right? So it's its own thing. You go one film back, On Her Majesty's is a totally different energy. You go one film forward, Live and Let Die, completely different. Diamonds is a weird bastard child of the franchise, and sometimes you're in the mood for the outliers.
It also feels like, to me, maybe the best Bond hangout movie, because I throw it on a lot too, and I didn't when I was young. I did not find it propulsive enough to keep my attention, but now that I am, aging away, I very often will throw on Diamonds Are Forever.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's also one of the, how do I put this? When the 4K transfers are streaming, for whatever reason, Diamonds is one of the best transfers out of the bunch. Some of them don't look as good to me. Like Man with the Golden Gun looks terrible in 4K, but the Diamonds one kind of looks great. And it's not a movie you think of as a good-looking movie, but again, if you watch these things enough, you're kind of thirsty for any way to sort of experience them in a new way. And so when I want to watch a 4K Bond movie, for whatever reason, Diamonds hovers near the top because they did a nice job on the transfer. But as far as hangout movies and vibes go, I would go Thunderball because aesthetically, it's the most pleasing to me. I love that score. It's got maybe the most beautiful collection of Bond women collectively under one title.
Mm-hmm.
The clothing is fantastic. The scenery's great. I love the Bahamas location, and it covers. Weirdly, it covers all seasons. Like he's wearing warm weather stuff in the beginning, and then there's like London, and then he's in the Bahamas. It's just got. It's a Bond for all seasons, I think, which a lot of the other Bonds can't brag.
Also Sharks, which of course were in Never Say Never Again as well.
Sharks, you gotta love the Sharks. Yeah. And Never Say Never Again, of course, is basically a remake of Thunderball, but much like Diamonds is the only Connery 70s Bond, Never Say Never Again is the only 80s Connery Bond. And as much as it's got a kind of limp musical score and is not as propulsive as some of his other films, there's a weird Superman 3 energy to Never Say Never Again that sometimes that's the flavor that you're in the mood for.
Now, you said you hate rankings, but every guest is being hit with this question. I'll give you a mild out because we want everyone's rankings of the Connery films, but maybe if you don't want to necessarily rank every movie, kind of like the high points of the low.
Oh, I don't want to be a diva about it.
Oh,
But
okay.
if you want a ranking, my caveat is that tomorrow my ranking will be different.
Of
But
course.
today, my ranking for Connery films is going to have to be From Russia with Love at number 1.
Mm-hmm.
I would put Dr. No at number 2 for all the sort of specialness that I quoted earlier. I would probably put Goldfinger at 3, and then Thunderball at 4. And I would say that You Only Live Twice and Diamonds are a tie for me at the moment.
Right.
Tied for last.
Yeah, I find with You Only Live Twice, I often alternate that one into my last place. Just has never stuck with me as much as the others.
There's something kind of endless about it. It goes and goes, and it's not particularly propulsive plot-wise. Connery is fully checked out, which can work for him sometimes, but he's checked out in a way that doesn't feel as fun as in Diamonds.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So yeah, it's not one of my top Bonds ever, and I would have to put it near the bottom of my Connerys for sure.
Fair enough. Well, Phil, thank you so much for your time. Let the people know how they can follow you online.
Oh, just hit up Fangoria on any of the channels, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram. Fangoria is where I can usually be found.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
There you have it, folks. You might just think that we are Sean Connery celebrated out, but we did mention a Spy Master interview earlier in the show. So, Cam, I think the question is, what do we have for the folks next week?
Yes, we are taking the plunge once again into Thunderball land. We are joined by Luciana Paluzzi, who's joining us on the show to talk about her iconic character Fiona Volpe and all the other spy work she did over that particular era.
That's right, folks. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to keep the Connery party going. And join us next week as we sit down with the one and only Luciana Paluzzi. It's sure to be a highlight of the Spyhards year, so make sure you tune in wherever you get your podcasts. And if you don't already, please make sure to follow us discreetly online at Spyhards. That's SPYHARDS on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But until next time, folks, you'll find Cam and I trying furiously to start up the Norman Burton fan club.